David M. Rountree is the Chief Science Advisor for Scientific Paranormal Investigative Research Information and Technology, or SPIRIT Lab. Dr. Stephen Rourke has lectured on developmental psychology, cognition, theoretical and applied physics, and EVP, that'd be electronic voice phenomena, as a subset of ITC, instrumental transcommunication, with potential implications for the theoretical physics community regarding the existence of multiple dimensions beyond the standard model. Dr. Rourke's most recent study includes the application of information theory, persuasion theory, and certain aspects of psychology to the paranormal, i.e. paramimetics. These two gents work together, but they've never done a radio show together, as they revealed to us at the end of this, so this episode is monumental in the interview portion as well as the after chat. Get ready for what I believe is one of our best episodes top to bottom, even if it ends in unfortunate sadness at the bottom. Paratopia, here is the final episode with Jeff and I as co-hosts. Well, Paratopia, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Stephen Rourke and David Rountree. Gentlemen, we are, of course... Well, first of all, let me just say, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
This is interesting because, we just mentioned that we were going to change our format, and you were among the first people to email us and say, hey, we'd like 2 hours. And we said, well, we'll give you your 2 hours, but why don't you come on and chat with us, too? So thank you for doing this.
Oh, absolutely.
And we want to get into, of course, your SpiritCom material, but before we do that, I think Jeff has a round of questions just purely about the technology and the science behind what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. David, I'm curious. I had heard you on our dear friends over at Erie Radio some time ago. You got to talking a little bit about the technology that you are using to... you're looking at everything from free air conductance to radioactive emissions and magnetic fields and electromagnetic fields surrounding what we think is paranormal phenomena. But you're also looking at stuff like, injecting energy like via Tesla coils into an area to observe what effect that may or may not have.
Right.
And I'm curious where all that is taking you, or what you're gleaning out of that.
Well, I don't think 2 hours is enough to go over the journey. But, the whole thing started, when I started out, first of all, in 1976, technology was like in the Stone Age. I mean, I basically lugged around a 70-pound TIAC A4010S reel-to-reel,
right.
A couple of big, bulky government mine detectors that had been, Army mine detectors that had been rewired to be passive receivers. The list goes on and on. It took a small U-Haul truck, to carry the equipment around.
Right.
Now, with technology the way it is, you can carry in a backpack an entire laboratory, essentially. But to move ahead a little quicker, my whole concept was to look at the environment around these type of activities and try to measure and record and monitor as much about the environment as absolutely possible, and do that in real time during a paranormal event in order to put into perspective exactly what's going on in the world around us when these things are occurring. Now, that led to a really in-depth study of electronic voice phenomena and a detailed analysis, as well as experiments with mediums as to how they get their information, where that information possibly may come from, to actually finding rudimentary evidence of a potential wormhole connection to the whole paranormal phenomena. And I mean everything from cryptozoology all the way through to the garden variety ghosts. So a lot of it is connected in the ways that it affects the environment, but I think that connection that we're seeing is actually a reflection of what is actually creating the opportunity for it to happen, not so much as the paranormal activity itself. I think probably maybe 10% of what we're actually seeing is the actual paranormal activity, and the other 90% is what facilitates that behavior to manifest itself in our environment.
Do you both agree on that? And if so, did you both come to the same conclusions through the same work?
Dr. Rourke and I see things very similarly. I mean, we perceive things in a very similar manner, and we actually try to take it apart and digest it in a very similar manner. So, and then, of course, Steve, you can talk for yourself.
Oh, yeah, and I would say mostly in agreement, although, David and I have been having a conversation for years, and it's still ongoing, so there's particular points, but I would say, in the gross features of what you just brought up, yeah, we agree. And we arrived at it through, I would say, pretty much the same habit of mind. And whereas David has come to appreciate you do not underplay the environmental factors that contribute to the observance or the actual occurrence of paranormal phenomenon, I've come to appreciate that we shouldn't underplay or fail to appreciate how important cultural constructs and beliefs are, and how really any proposed definition of the word paranormal that fails to acknowledge the deep-seated personal belief systems, which are really inherently connected to its concepts, I think has missed the point. Mm-hmm. So we come from it really, maybe from the same habit of mind, but attempting to complement each other.
Yeah. See, Stephen actually has a more in-depth concept of the mind and its reaction to this phenomena, and where I have more of the actual technical experience of the field manifestation and measurement. So he deals more with the perception and perceived notions that this type of activity creates in the human psyche. And between the two of us bouncing these things back and forth between us, we correct each other often. I mean, we alter each other's perception in our own work, I think. And in that aspect, we make a very good partnership.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you guys have the you've definitely got the technology end of things covered, and you definitely have the human mind part of things covered. How far do you go back into what we've talked about on the show a lot, which is the notion of marginality and anti-structure within manifestations of paranormal events, such as what that person who has the haunted house, what's going on in their life at that point, what the circumstances were surrounding a paranormal event, not just their perception of what they saw or didn't see, but more along the lines of that whole trickster thing where we're talking about what is surrounding the event as opposed to the event itself.
Well, I'll take the baton on this first. First of all, when you do an investigation, you have to really look up what that word means and then practice that. And what I mean by that is I was a police officer for about 5 or 6 years of my life. And during that period of time, I also became a crime scene investigator and handled forensic evidence and actually built cases. So I take that same set of skills and apply it to my own research into the paranormal. So I actually have two segments of my research. Part of it is the academic research and the field research and experimentation, and the other part is the actual investigation of the environment and of the actual casework itself. And that's handled just like a criminal case. I mean, when we go into a situation, we handle everything as if it was going to court, even though it doesn't. But in a way, it will go to court, and that's the court of public opinion. So we have a rule on the investigation team that we have to come up with a preponderance of evidence to reach a conclusion that there is something paranormal going on. And we only reach that conclusion 7 or 8% of the time in all the cases that we deal with. We often eliminate a lot of things that are going on due to natural, everyday explained, occurrences that are going on in the home. High radon levels, abnormally high EMF coming off the electrical service, right. High levels of carbon monoxide, history of mental illness. You go and you do an in-depth background, and you also do an in-depth history study of both the property and the house and the region where it's occurring. So you have to get all of this data together in order to come to some conclusion at the end of gathering your actual evidence during the case, you can leave no stone unturned. And that's not being done.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the other part I was going to get to, which was I think everybody at this point pretty much knows how I view the UFO community. But how do you? And we've been asking this just about to every ghost-minded person that we have on, investigators, theorists, and what have you. How do you see the state of the field that you're in? Do you see yourself almost as separate from it? Do you see that it's a huge mess? I mean, do you see it as a big mess?
Yeah, well, I'll take this one first. I sure hope I'm separate from it. Because there is, as you know, there's a fair degree of lunacy associated with any interest in fringe subjects. And I think that is part of the fascination from a psychological standpoint. But to be real clear, there to the degree that any of this, these folks interested in this, to the degree that their loose affiliation can be called an organization, you could say that to the same exact degree there's organizational pathology.
Okay. David, what do you have to add to that?
Well, there's actually two kinds, well, there's probably more, but there's two major subsets of quotation mark paranormal investigator and quotation mark. There are the what I want to call the populist groups, and these are the groups that have little or no formal training, see something on TV, buy some equipment, and go out and hunt for ghosts. And probably about 90% of the field is made up of those. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that it's wonderful that people are getting involved, and hopefully they'll actually discover something that can be, added to the field, and I don't want to, talk down about them or anything else. But that's one level. If they, there's a lot of mistakes that are made at that level for various reasons. Then there's an intermediate level, and those are people who have some formal training. They have some background, but they tend to not remain objective in their investigative techniques. And so while they are a little step ahead as far as technology and implementation and understanding what they're getting, they're oftentimes trying to fit the data or the evidence into their preconceived notion of what's going on. And then there's like a very small percentage that's actually at the top that's doing, blazing trails as far as making discoveries and doing stuff. And I can probably count them on both my hands if I were, if I were pushed to name names. I mean, I don't believe I could fill up both my hands with the people that are doing it, but the ones that are doing it are very good. You don't hear from them. Tim Hart, for example, I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He came up and founded a thing called the Mesa Project, in which he was the first person in his small team to actually monitor effects of a paranormal event in real time with data logging technology. And he basically measured 12 different data points during an actual paranormal event. He pioneered it. And very few people know about him. But he is right there on the cutting edge. But like I say, the people that are actually doing this, they are few and far between. And when we do find each other, it's very rewarding.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, here's the other big question that I'm sure is on every listener's mind at this point: is ghost investigation? Let's say, let's put it this way. They say that a lot of the chefs that you see on television aren't really the best chefs in the business. They're just mediocre chefs, but they got a TV show. So how would we apply that to ghost hunting?
Well, that's a leading question, isn't it?
Just a little. Sorry.
Well, I'm not a plumber, but I play one on TV.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
No, all kidding aside. There's a whole mentality that goes along with, and Stephen could probably go into that in more detail than I could. But I can say that there are a lot of people that are out there in hopes of getting their own TV show.
Right.
And we all encounter them. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But it depends on, do you want to be a TV star? Do you want to find some answers? And there are two. I'm not saying they can't mix, because I believe in the right circumstances they could mix with the right TV people, the right producers, the right team, could actually present something that would be, something you would put on the Science Channel or something like that. I do believe that. It's just not out there right now.
This may be a good opportunity for me to chime in and connect to your point and almost kind of clarify what I meant by organizational pathology, because it sounds like I'm attempting to throw away, the baby with the bathwater. That's not at all my intention. It's a simple observation that if you look at the way people deal with each other and the motivations that contribute to the hierarchical structures in these groups and the way they dissolve or resolve themselves in certain ways, just the infighting, it just appears to me that all of these pathologies exist in a higher degree in these types of groups. And this is not an outrageous statement. If you ask anyone who's been in these groups, they can tell you, wow, yeah, it's crazy stuff. There's always this power struggle and the infighting and the drama and the so I don't think to state that organizationally, that there are a lot of issues, and I think that's a bottom-up kind of thing. I think it's very inductive. I think it speaks to some of the individual psychological schema contributes ultimately to, the organizational pathologies. And this is not a statement to just say I'm sitting people on a couch and calling them crazy.
Right.
I'm simply stating a fact that there's not a whole lot of cohesion, and there's, there really is more infighting. There's infighting to a higher degree than in almost any other type of anti-structure I've seen.
Yeah, preaching to the choir here. I mean,
yeah.
For us, we had George Hansen on the show some time ago, actually twice, and he views all of the infighting, the lack of cohesion of all of these groups, and the fact that none of them last very long. He attributes that to being part of how this phenomenon works. That this is not necessarily, if you were to say to him, there's a psychological dynamic within a group that just causes this to happen, his answer to that would be, well, I think that's ridiculous to call that purely a psychological, that's reducing everything to the psychological. And there's certainly that component, but that the overall picture is one of an anti-structural relationship that we have to the paranormal. In other words, it's a toxic relationship. And so none of these groups last very long, simply because it's the dynamic of how this works. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Well, let me give you an example, too, from personal experience. Since 1976, I have probably led 35 or 40 different groups of people. Mm-hmm. And those groups of people have rotated in and out, and some of them I have never heard from again, and some of them I hope to never hear from again. But here's the problem. When you start an organization and then you open it up to the public and you let anybody come in, you are going to get a group dynamic that is, unless you are an absolute ironclad leader, very difficult to manage. So management breakdown causes infighting, and then there are the ego clashes, and that's what tears a group apart. Now, the group that I have right now has been in existence now for about 6 years with the same people.
Wow.
And we are all professionals. We're all specialists. We are all with scientific backgrounds. We all have each an individual discipline. And we're all interested in the paranormal for different reasons based on our own concepts with our own personal disciplines. So we come at it like a team of scientists, and that's exactly how we reach it. And we are very successful, and we're very cohesive, because while we have two leaders, we have a co-leader. I have a co-director that works with me in the investigative end, and we are all considered equals within the group. We do not add a new person without an open vote of the people involved. And then we usually have a person who comes in new, goes on several outings with us in investigations before they're allowed to join the group or become a permanent member, because everybody has to be in agreement that it will be a cohesive match, because team dynamics is the most imperative, important part of any organization and any endeavor that you're going to do. Right. And that's lacking in a lot of these groups because they let anybody join.
Well, and then the other question for you is how do, obviously, you've got a good team now, but like you just said, it's taken you 40 some odd groups to get to this point. By the same token, then how do you deal with other investigators that may or may not be on the same page that you are, and therefore may marginalize your work, may poo-poo your work? David, going from your standpoint alone, I think you could pretty much stomp to dust just about anybody in this field as far as solid data, even possibly duplicatable stuff. But there's a whole other matter of then presenting that to the public in a cohesive way, and then dealing with the feedback and/or fallout from the public. So how have you been able to do that for all of these years and maintain? How do you continue to give a shit?
Well, first of all, that's not what keeps me going. I could care less what other people think. Mm-hmm. If I was concerned about what other people think, I would have gotten out of this field 30 years ago. But I have never given a public presentation that I didn't capture everybody in that audience, and they were on my side when they walked out the door.
Right.
However, the biggest problem comes from the internet, from people who glance over something that you publish. And this is one thing about me. I put everything I do online. I tell you exactly how to duplicate the experiment, exactly what equipment was used, exactly what I found. I hide nothing. The only thing that I don't put out there are photographs, because people will attack you, rip them apart. Mm-hmm. I put out very few audio recordings for the same reasons, because there are trolls out there who sit in their mama's basement in their jockey shorts with nothing better to do and no life, and they do their best to live vicariously through the internet because they feel very brave when they're hiding behind a screen.
Now they have podcasts.
There it is.
There you go. But the thing is I've been attacked numerous times. Stephen's been attacked numerous times. I consider the source. Yeah. If they are attacking me, it's because they do not understand what I'm talking about. And that's fine. I go out of my way to try to reason with people. And believe it or not, I get probably 100 emails a day from people saying, hey, you're doing great work. I really love what you're doing. Or I get phone calls from people talking to me about it. They're trying to duplicate something. I help people out. I get emails from people all over the country who are having problems, don't have anyone near them, and they ask me for advice, and I try to help those people. But one of those people that you help and that says thank you outshadows 1,000 of the people who fight against you.
Right.
So the personal rewards way outweigh the nuisances that come with the field. I used to get really.
Can I come to your field now?
What was that?
I said, can I come over to your field? Because it ain't that way over here.
Well, it didn't get that way overnight around me, but I don't put up with nonsense either. That's the whole thing. It used to really bother me. I used to fight. And I realized I was wasting so much time defending things to people that it didn't make any difference to anyway. That my work was you only have so much time. I have a family. I have other obligations. You only have so much time to devote to it. And when you're defending stuff to nitwits, it's a waste of time. And finally I just said, you know what, the hell with people, and I just disengaged from them. And that's how I handle it.
So the answer is put your head down and do your work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't stray far from the path.
Right, exactly. Well, Dave, we're Where have you gone with the EVP thing? I mean, what if you get a good EVP and it's demonstrable that it's legit, or you think it's legit? What are some of the things that you're noticing around the capture of something like that in the environment? Because I heard you mention on Erie about a device that, and I'm probably going to explain it completely wrong, but ever since I've heard about it, I've thought nothing about ghost hunting, except I got to get me one of these. That you set it across the two objects. They're two devices. They're set across the room from each other, and they ping each other at a certain rate.
That's the time. That's the time slip detector.
Yes.
Actually, what it is, it was actually a device that was, and I forget the guy who designed it, but the person who refined it was Jean-Louis, I can't think of his last name, French physicist. He's actually working on alternative energy technologies right now, but it was originally designed to measure torsion fields.
Okay.
And how it works is you take two high-frequency, very, very stable oscillators, and you run them about 12 feet apart, and they actually beat against each other, and there's a small comparator circuit that takes the difference in the two frequencies, even though they're supposed to be like, 900 megahertz. There's a slight differential in them due to manufacturing inconsistencies. So you end up with an audio frequency differential that's, in my case, on my device, it's like 700 hertz.
Okay.
So when you're running that, it stays at a constant 700 hertz because everything in the equation stays the same. But then when that frequency shifts, the only thing in the equation that is shifting is the time coefficient. So you're actually measuring a time differential. Something is occurring that's affecting time. You have a time anomaly occurring. And those things are what started cluing me into there may be some kind of opening that's occurring that's destabilizing a very localized region of our reality, so to speak, of our universe. And it's generally no bigger than a 20-foot area. And a lot of things go on in that 20-foot area. And the theory that, it's a hypothesis that I have right now, is that an actual wormhole opens and allows this energy to propagate into our environment from points unknown.
Okay.
But that was one of the devices that is run when we're doing an investigation, along with a lot of other devices. Now, a lot of the other devices I've put together, and not really designed, but it's like an apparatus where you take off-the-shelf components and you combine them to measure certain aspects. But we try to measure EMF. I just made a direction finder that allows me to triangulate the actual point of entry into a room where the EVP is coming in at, so that we can go to that specific point and start making measurements to see what's really going on and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think the schematic is actually on my website. I forget what paper I put it in, but it is actually on there. And there's a lot of stuff on the website that, will give you step-by-step, instructions to do it.
Yeah.
But this is a nice segue, actually, into Stephen's work with ITC, because EVP and ITC are very tightly related. And part of our argument that we have is that ITC, as practiced now, is off the mark as far as actually going for EVP.
Okay, so Dr. Rourke, go ahead and launch into that. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, David and I often discuss EVP as a subset of ITC only because of the, the historic kind of order of discovery. But
did I miss it? What does IPC stand for?
Instrumental Transcommunication.
Oh, ITC. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, but I've got to say I'm pretty critical of a lot of the ITC work that's gone before, and I think what David's referring to is some of the modern day approaches have not really taken any advancements. There's no real steps further. I mean, some of the equipment's gotten slightly fancier, but that compounded by the problem that the habit of mind has not become much improved either. And so there's this assumed kind of explanatory schema going into much of the quote-unquote experiments, where people are looking for confirmation, not information. So I kind of would rather call ITC the kind of like a cult of techno-mediumship, unless it's done properly. And again, I think as you heard from David, you can, if we had a magic wand and could imagine if you could sap crazy from the entire field, you'd probably have, 12 people standing in the room.
Do not tease me, sir.
No, yeah. But so the point is that our take on ITC is that it ought to be done a whole lot differently, that there are best evidence standards regarding technology, approach, data collection, and analysis that ought to be done. And, without, starting to sound like a lecture, I think people understand what we mean when we say that there are certain processes that ought to go on, regarding people wanting to know what actually happened. There's a process you go through. Mm-hmm. And this stuff is really, the subject matter it's outside the mainstream paradigm enough. And so David and I have had plenty of discussions about how are we going to pull the people, the resources needed, the brain trust, how are we going to attract those folks to solve some of these problems? I mean, he and I are pretty, good on the chalkboard with equations, but there are people we would need to do higher order math. And how do you attract them if everything is done in a non-scientific way, with a lack of a critical mind, with this whole kind of vibe of crazy going on? You're never going to attract those people. So that's our main appeal. And as far as the connection between ITC and EVP goes, we've decided that EVP holds out the greatest promise, as a subset of ITC, holds out the greatest promise for meaningful data. And one, because it's extremely easy, and compared to the video/audio data that ITC can produce, it's a whole lot easier to analyze and collect. Plus, there's some exclusionary parameters right at the outset that make EVP pretty interesting, because ordinarily folks who experience paranormal phenomenon, you can understand that it's usually considered something like a phantom touch or presence, or the sleep paralysis is kind of a popular explanation, right? But you can say that EVP, be it EMF or what someone might call an audio signal on a tape, or something approximating human speech when no one was talking, let's just say. I mean, that's pretty objective, right? I mean, you can't say that was a sensed presence or a hypnagogic hallucination.
Well, how do you rule out radio signals, things of that nature?
Oh, well, I mean, that would be David's druthers, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Yeah, because everything with a battery and a wire, right, is an antenna. So, I mean, how do we, how do we deal with that? I mean, David, I'll tell you that the two recorders that I've used for doing EVP are a Zoom H4 and an H2. Am I completely screwing that up, or should I be using something else?
What was it now? I have a hard time understanding.
I have a Zoom H4 and a Zoom H2, and both of them are pretty high-end digital recorders, wide spectrum frequency stuff. I mean, should I be using something a lot narrower? Because I know a lot of people that at least in popular media, tend to be using the tiny Olympuses and all that sort of thing, just like your regular memo recorders, which these Zoom products are definitely not that.
Yeah, those little voice recorders are horrible, and they add artifacts into the recording that can be mistaken for EVPs when they really aren't. Mm-hmm. The best digital recorder you can get is the best way to go. The microphones, on the other hand, are another story. Mm. What EVP actually is, first of all, to understand the whole concept of why ITC is off the mark, you have to understand what EVP is to start with. And it's not voice, it's not audio. It's actually an EMF wave that's in the audio spectrum. And since we don't speak to each other in the radio frequency band, it's highly doubtful that when we die we sprout a transmitter and are able to modulate our voice onto a transmitter to transmit it on a broadcast band. Mm-hmm. How it actually works is even the cheapest dynamic microphone you can buy from Radio Shack, which is like $29.95 or something like that, is an excellent source for picking up EVP. And that's because it doesn't go through the diaphragm of the mic. It actually excites the voice coil of the mic and moves the voice coil in response to the EMF wave, and that's what puts the recording onto your device. So the built-in microphones that you get are generally either condenser microphones or electret microphones. Condenser microphones won't pick up EVP at all because they work off the principle of changing capacitance. And there's no real change in capacitance associated with EVP. However, an electret microphone will work to some degree because it is a polarized element, and it does respond to the change in the magnetic field that EMF creates. It's a dynamic field. And but the best microphone is a plain garden variety dynamic microphone. I tend to use a Shure SM58 microphone because it's a very good microphone. It's got very fine voice coil wire, so it responds rather easily. But we have experimented with microphones with the diaphragm completely cut away, just using the voice coil as a detector, and we've picked up EVP crystal clear with it. So in that aspect, as far as ITC is concerned, they're barking up the wrong tree. Mm-hmm. And we can go into, in a little while, after Stephen spends more time on the whole ITC concept, we can actually go into what I feel would be a very realistic way of creating an ITC device that has a higher probability of working.
Well, this is a good segue because we've often had discussions about, attracting, the brightest minds to kind of bear upon the paranormal problem. And we said, well, one tactic, one strategy might be to try to elevate some aspect of the phenomenon that has a great deal of replicability, some phenomenon that is easily falsified, and by that I mean it's eminently testable. And we thought, well, this would be a transition from paranormal to perinormal. And it's not something you hear advocated often, but it would be incredibly powerful in attracting folks from, just this redefinition of terms and this elevation of, let's say, EVP from paranormal to paranormal. And what's an interesting overlap is a significant modern example of a paranormal phenomenon is, in fact, EMF. At one time, EMF was debatable from a scientific perspective, but it was later proven to be real. And is currently accepted by the scientific community, right? So we're into this issue of is something paranormal or perinormal, and you don't know until you address something called the measurability problem. And I think David has conquered the measurability problem by confronting the issue that this is not, voices. This is EM. And so the paranormal phenomenon, obviously everyone knows what para means above, and that's why it's a strange phenomenon. But perinormal phenomenon really just describes unknown forces which at first appear to be paranormal and are later verified scientifically. And if David's experiments continue, well, I'd argue that EVP fits that description, even if not fully understood. One could argue lots of things that are considered non-paranormal are not fully understood. We probably don't need to go here, but it seems like an open-ended conversation. Even fourth-dimensional, the shadow matter that's evidence of a parallel universe, that really, while it's accepted now by the scientific community, this idea of parallel universes and all this, if it's not hinged on a religious notion of, the plenitude of God and you can't restrict him, if it's not hinged on that, it's certainly parallel universes, certainly a concept established by the metaphysical community. The Psychical Society included physicists who later went on to win Nobel Prizes, right. Including Sir William Crookes, whose invention led to the cathode ray tube, right? So anyway, this is just an example of some of the stuff you'll see in BBC and science journals. Just this notion that it's very well established, even though it's not eminently testable, but it's very well established that our galaxy should have blown apart billions of years ago because, the spin is too fast. And but what holds our own Milky Way galaxy together is this sphere of dark matter which surrounds it. I mean, you hear the words coming out of my mouth, they sound so outrageous, and yet this is quote, well established. Hubble offers some maps, I know, and but this eminently untestable dark matter sphere, it's suggested it weighs 10 times more than our galaxy, hence bringing everything into balance. Mm-hmm. And while the Hubble offers these maps, which clearly is data, but even those maps concede, well, it's what should be. It should be matter, but it's dark matter, so it's like invisible matter. Anyway, it's suggested that this dark matter is really the matter in another parallel universe. I mean, this is one suggestion by eminent physicists. Mm. So if dark matter is an invisible matter that pervades the universe, which has gravity/mass, then one could say that this shadow matter, being matter from a parallel universe, having gravity freely going between universes and dimensions, as gravity is the warping of space, and it has real mass in another universe that is exhibited as measured gravity in our universe. And this stuff, it sounds so, it's convoluted, but this is considered, and I quote, well established. So the notion that David measures these voice phenomenon as EMF, to say that we can't elevate that to paranormal phenomenon and advance the field by attracting legitimate mathematicians and physicists is absurd. Of course it can be done, but what you got to do is get a proper scientific habit of mind. You've got to speak the language of the folks you want to attract, and you've got to take the damn crazy out of the phenomenon you're studying. And that addresses not just the individual kind of schema, but also the organizational pathology we discussed earlier.
Well, do you see a crossover? I mean, we've talked a lot about the crossover of stuff like the UFO phenomena and the ghost phenomena, and I've remarked never the two shall meet. It seems to be kind of like the rallying cry between the paranormal fields is we don't talk to each other, which I think is complete bullshit, but it's the truth. I mean, they don't, and that's one of the things we try to do.
Yeah, we were discussing, as you know, David and I just started a podcast called, like you said, everyone's got a podcast. We just started a podcast called The Devil's Advocate, and that's why we were pitching you for time on your show. But we were kind of tossing show ideas around, and I said, what'd be interesting is to discuss this, paranormal experiencer / alien abductee contactee connection. Just this, and I'm not making a general statement to say that this is inclusive of all experiencers, contactees, or folks who believe they've, glimpsed the ineffable. But this is to say that just in broad terms, so that we can have a discussion, there is this element of self-aggrandizement and egoism that is central to most of the experiencers in both camps. If you consider, look at someone like, do you know who, let's say, someone like Mark Macy or Chris Moon is? These folks.
Cricket.
Yeah. Not on our radar. Sorry about that.
Well, as I see, they didn't generate a lot of excitement. The EVP ITC community would know who they are. But there are, so I only bring those names up because we kind of have the Billy Myers of our own field, know. Okay. And the point is that there's this central, a human self-aggrandizement that places people at the center of, not just a universe, but a multiverse, and there's these imaginary places called Time Stream. There's this whole narrative where the people on Time Stream are technicians who give builders on this side intuitive clues. It's just this, you would not believe the narrative that is woven from the insanity that is the underbelly of this field. But there is this typical instrumental transcommunication account has a self-aggrandizing theme, like they communicated with me through the radio and they have a message for me. Now, take the word radio out and it sounds really familiar, guys.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you, maybe that's a good place to go into the spirit comm stuff, but before we segue there, here's a sort of a question out of left field. We get a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot. We have a few people who ask us, why don't you deal with the occult and magic and things like that on the show? And I have an aversion to it. But have you ever done an experiment where you go to a place that has no signs of being haunted or EVP or anything like that, and had someone who claims to be a magician work their magic and conjure up a high strangeness?
Talk to David. Yeah, I don't really do any of the in-field stuff, so that'd be David.
I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but in my past life, I actually was a practicing shaman, and I practiced what was called wolf medicine, and before that it was coyote medicine, but it's a Native American type of religion, and it has religious overtones in it, but it also deals with the metaphysical, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with the term shaman, but in the 1980s I was still doing scientific research as well as involved in the metaphysical aspects of the paranormal. For various different reasons, and a lot of people would come to me for help with issues that they had of a quasi-spiritual nature. And in doing that, I actually met someone whose first words out of his mouth when he met me, and the woman who asked us for help was living on this guy's property, in one of the houses on his property. He walks up to me and he says, "Can you conjure demons?" "I can." And he was dead serious. And I'll go a step further. When I went into his home, because he was giving me a tour of his house and pointing out all the activity in his house, and there was quite a bit, his den was nothing but bookshelves on all four walls. On those bookshelves were leather-bound volumes, scrolls, some clay tablets. The leather books that I actually picked off and looked through were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars as collector's items because they were grimoires from the Dark Ages.
Wow. And
they were handwritten in Latin with diagrams and all sorts of stuff. So this man, and he was a redneck, typical, needed a ladder to get into his pickup truck, but his grandfather had been one of the founding people of Levy County in Florida. And he's not mentioned in the history books. And the reason is because he was involved in the dark arts, and they wrote him out of the history. Jeez. But needless to say, I encountered something that, for lack of a better term, I'll call it extreme negativity.
Well, is this something that you could reproduce in a lab setting or something along those lines?
No. I wouldn't even know where to begin. There was phenomena involved, including levitation of an individual, possession, where literally the body contorted in such a way as that I don't believe it's physically impossible what they did. I watched a jalousie window open with the crank not turning, and when it was over, I reached and grabbed the crank and turned it, and it was connected and actually closed the window back. These are things that defied the laws of physics.
You saw the levitation?
Saw the levitation.
And how far off the ground? Are you it couldn't have been a David Blaine street magic trick or something?
No, this was in this guy's house, and it was his girlfriend. She became possessed, and she literally lifted a foot off the ground. And no wires, no nothing. We were all right there and within an arm's reach of it. And I'll tell you what it does, it disorients you when you witness something like that.
Yeah.
And to make a long story short, we ended up dealing with this, and it took about 3 months with a lot of people working together to get rid of the stuff that was there. And from that day forward, I never got involved with the metaphysical aspect of it again.
Now, did that guy ask you to help him? I don't. When he
No,
was
no,
like,
no.
I can do magic, and then,
No,
help.
He did not want us there.
Huh.
He was renting a house to this woman who had a 2-year-old child who was in the attic talking to Beelzebub, is what he was calling it. Yeah, So we walked into this, and I was trying to remain completely objective, but it broke down. And,
well, yeah, when somebody floats around off the floor in front of you, that tends to do that. You know?
And this story can be verified by my partner at the time who was working with me on this, Robert Lunt, who currently lives near Virginia City, Nevada, and we are entertaining writing a book about the whole story. But it's a very difficult book to write because I have literally blocked out huge segments of my life during that time period, and it only comes back when he and I talk about it on the telephone. Bits and pieces of it start to come back to me. So I was profoundly affected by what we went through. And he was the observer. I mean, through the whole thing, I think he was meant to be the person to record it. He was the person who was meant to remember it, who was meant to be the observer, to put it all into perspective. And he still remembers every detail of it. And him and I are going to have to work together to try to put it down on paper. But even if you don't believe it and you think it's all BS, it's going to be a very entertaining story. But to answer your question in 45 words or less, yes.
Geez, now I can't let this go. When you say meant to, what do you mean by that?
I think he was preordained to be the person who would recall it all, because
Why?
the rest of us were even further involved. He was on a learning experience at the time. He was actually learning to be a shaman, and he was all eyes and ears. He was experiencing everything fully, whereas the rest of the people involved were more focused on individual tasks and dealing with things. He was the person who, like, we were given a crystal, for example, to use as a weapon against this thing by a very famous psychic who didn't even know why we were there, but gave us all kinds of information that turned out to be very helpful. And he went and cleansed it in the middle of a spring and a river, dove down with snorkels to the mouth of the spring, which was 20 feet underwater, to cleanse this crystal. I mean, he was the mechanic. He was doing all the support work around it. And he remembered and saw and witnessed almost as being, completely detracted away from it. I mean, he wasn't connected, and yet he was. So he remembers everything, but he's the only person of everyone involved that remembers everything about what happened. And I find that kind of fascinating from a psychological point of view.
Thanks for giving us nightmares. Let's move on to the spirit
actually, I have a question before you move on. David, when you were embroiled in this thing, I take it you certainly weren't living in this location, correct? I mean, you weren't living at the house.
No.
Okay, so it stands to reason that while this is going on and while you're investigating this and you're seeing and experiencing a lot of weird stuff, that would tend to occupy your every thought, would it not?
It was, I'll tell you, it was a weird time for me for a lot of reasons. My father had just died prior to it in Virginia, out of the blue. So in the middle of all this, I had to go and deal with that funeral. And so the whole time frame was a really messed up time frame for me, to the point where I could not grieve for my father because of the preoccupation I had with what was going on with this. And it wasn't until almost a year later that I actually grieved for my father's loss.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was, and I can sympathize with people who claim to have demonic experiences, because what I witnessed, I could easily classify as a demonic situation.
Well, and that's the question for you is, while you were investigating this, everybody always has the same question, at least for me, when I talk about going to Gettysburg or visiting a haunted location or what have you, is, am I going to bring anything home with me? And that's the question I have for you, and that is, when you were investigating this, and obviously it was occupying a lot of your thoughts, a lot of your intentions, a lot of your focus, did you have manifestations happen to you apart from the scene that were happening maybe in your own home or to you alone?
every member of the group had experiences that went home with them.
Yeah.
Mm.
And there it is.
Every member of the group. In fact, Robbie and I had a reoccurring hellhound situation where we actually had a black dog with red eyes that manifested itself with both of us. And he lived on one side of town, I lived on the other. And we would compare experiences on a day-to-day basis when we weren't working together. And we were both working together actually at the time doing performing arts. We were techies. We were doing lighting and sound work. Mm-hmm. So we were working together a lot and got to talk together, every day pretty much during this time period. And then when we weren't working, we were working on this case. So we were all having, and then talking with other members of the group that assembled, we were all having personal experiences away from the scene that were very threatening.
Well, see, and the reason I asked that is I had a case, I mean, it's probably been 18 years ago or so, where a man and his girlfriend were walking in a decidedly New Age type retreat. And, I mean, the way it was put to me was that the place that they were is known for fairies. People have seen fairy phenomena, if you believe in that sort of thing, in that location. And they came upon what he described to me were what he thought they were these little people. And he said, we began to walk over towards that direction. They were working on something, and they were standing in a circle. And he says, as we got closer, we started to get a really bad feeling, and we realized that they are around a disc, just a silver, nondescript disc on the ground, and they all turned around and looked at us. And when they looked at us, we backed away, and we left. And that culminated in them talking about it, focusing on it, it obviously occupying their every waking moment of thought, and therefore neither one of them could sleep. Neither one of them could. I mean, the way it was put to me was we couldn't escape it, because then it started happening at home. Things that were completely undeniable, that were not a joke, were not, oh, I think I saw that. It was very obvious. It was very in your face. And the only way that they could escape it was they got in their car and drove to New York City to be around people.
Right. Yeah, here's the thing. I mean, you have to look at it objectively. And looking back at it, I can look at it now objectively. I couldn't then. But there's a tremendous psychological impact with these experiences. So we don't know how much of it is real and how much of it is influential. We don't. Right. And for me to say anything differently would be a conjecture. So I can't go into that aspect of it. But what I will say is this, and this is from my own knowledge based on recent research. If paranormal phenomena, including cryptozoology, UFOs, what have you, if it is related to interdimensional or transuniversal conduits, then there's nothing to regulate what can come in. We don't know what potential life form is capable of making that journey. We don't even know if it's not even possible that we may be able to make that journey going back. The thing that I think is occurring here is that we're experiencing a one-way portal that allows something to come in, and a different portal has to open for it to leave again. And that's consistent with theories of quantum mechanics, that a wormhole is basically a one-way conduit. I have recently refined my hypothesis to suggest that particularly in haunting phenomena, the wormhole that actually opens is shaped much like a double helix with two tubes and two throats. One throat allows the phenomena to enter. The other throat is the exit path. So the actual dual throat area is vortexing, actually spinning, and it's creating an area that defies certain laws of physics in a very localized area where these spinning throats are occurring. And we are witnessing something exit from one throat, hang around a bit, and then re-enter to go back. And in that small localized area is your paranormal event horizon. That's where the stuff is going on. And, of course, this is very premature. I've had only 3 experiments now to date, so it's far from conclusive. but the data is very promising, and it looks very much like that there's some type of opening that pops open that allows this stuff to just materialize out of nowhere. And what kind of put it together for me is many years ago I studied near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And the common theme is when they leave their body, they travel down this dark tunnel to a light at the other end. And that's the perfect definition of a wormhole. So if we die, and of course, according to Maxwell's laws of energy conservation, our energy that's in us, the impulses in our nerve endings, the brain waves that are electrically produced, that energy isn't created and it isn't destroyed. It continues on forever. So do we become beings of pure energy? And if so, we become a ball of electromagnetic fields that can essentially radiate out and transverse these wormholes as pure energy. So it's not a far leap. And much like Stephen was talking about earlier, this is based on sound theories and quantum mechanics. And the thing that's so huge about our research in the paranormal field is we may very well make a huge discovery in the field of quantum mechanics by discovering macro manifestations of QM that formerly have been theorized as being only experienced at a micro level. And if we can prove, for example, the existence of a wormhole, that will be huge for the scientific community. And in that aspect, I believe we will get scientific support in our research.
Yeah.
And that may be an issue of scalability, but there's also the issue of bringing the notion of quantum consciousness into this.
Exactly.
You know, the idea that this may complement, the wormhole hypothesis very well, because under quantum consciousness, the mind itself exists in a holographic universe and is akin to like a neural network. And therefore, then the thinking would be that the mind in a quantum universe could conceivably exist in multiple universes, meaning in one universe, you could be dead, another you'd be alive, or in some sense, your dead loved ones in another universe are still alive. This further compounding notion that in the quantum, there's one interpretation where all things aren't only possible but have occurred. So there's all this really coming into the debate, and I think the thing that we need to address first is what is thought. I mean, if this is really what we're talking about in quantum consciousness, so the question is really, is thought a stable structure? And the God helmet and plenty of experiments have brought this thought along, but even if you determine that thought is a stable structure, now you have to say, well, is it a stable structure that exists in a higher dimensional space-time fabric? So there's all these questions that I think is really important, because an interesting aspect of higher dimensional reality could be that a being residing in it would be able to predict events and then have an influence upon our four-dimensional world, three of space, one of time, because they would, so to speak, have a better view.
Well, there was something I wanted to ask Mark Nesbitt when we had him on the other week that I just neglected, and I think it fits in here, which is, have either of you run across a case where people start, well, say you've got a ghost of some sort that claims to be a little boy or a little girl or something, and if you don't play along with the character of that's a little boy, a little girl, can that thing get explosively angry? Could you blow its cover, so to speak, by taunting it in some way, that it becomes this horrific other event?
Well, I don't taunt, first of all, because I'm not willing to say it's a ghost in the first place. I have absolutely no empirical data to prove that.
Well, I think this would get to whether or not, whatever is coming through a wormhole or speaking to us is authentically itself,
Right. Can you influence it? Yes. And perhaps by taunting, running a 600,000-volt Tesla coil, I don't know if I'm angrifying it or feeding it, but the intensity definitely picks up. And I don't know if it's because I'm punching the hole through or propagating it so that it conducts better or how it's working at this point. All I know is that if we go into a place that's reportedly active and we have nothing going on, I was in a theater, for example, and nothing was going on. I roll out the Tesla coil, put it on a table on the stage, step back about 70 feet or so back into the crowd, and I fire that sucker up. And it starts lightning on the stage, and then things start happening. Now, is that taunting it? I don't know, but it's certainly stimulating it. I think that there is an interaction factor. I think the observer effect is definitely in play. In fact, when we do an investigation, we actually have a camera. When we're running different data sets and different apparatuses, the operator is being videotaped as well as the environment. Mm-hmm. Because we believe that the operator is just as much a vital element of the environment as the actual manifestation is.
Absolutely.
Because we want to make sure that the operator is not the cause, creation, feeding, or facilitator of what we are actually measuring. And that's a big, huge leap to infinity there, but that's what led us into the whole experiments that we're doing now with the mediums, studying mediums and how they work, is that they are observers who are interacting with this phenomena. And to me, that's a very fascinating thing because that also proves a very important aspect within quantum mechanics, dealing with the wave-particle duality aspect, whereas it's not a wave or a particle until you actually observe it. Mm-hmm. And I believe there's a certain amount of truth to that everything remains as probabilities until it's actually pinpointed.
Mm-hmm. And under that model, by the way, under that model of the collapsing of the wave function brings about the observable event, Michio Kaku himself might toy with the idea of there being some, if not a thought form, some alternative place where Elvis is still alive or fairy folk still exist, since all possibilities exist simultaneously, and it's only the collapsing of the wave function which brings them into view.
Think of it like this, gentlemen. Think of an old-fashioned clothesline where you've got like 6 clotheslines running parallel with each other, and you've got your laundry out there. You've got a bunch of bed sheets hanging on this clothesline, and they're all on different lines, and they're all next to each other, and they're hanging there. And under normal conditions, they all hang there perfectly straight, and they never interact with each other. But if a breeze blows through, suddenly they flap a bit here and there, and they touch each other in different places.
Right.
And where they touch, the length from one sheet will go to the other and vice versa. And there's a matter transference. And this is exactly the layers of the universe that we're dealing with. There are multiple universes all next to each other. And in fact, some of them could even occupy the exact same space, but just have a resonance of a different frequency than our own. And there could be people walking around us all the time. And we would never perceive them because we are vibrating at a much different rate than they are, much like many waveforms can travel on a radio frequency carrier and never interfere with each other and never even know they're there. Stereo FM transmission, for example. So the concept is fundamentally sound, that these things can all inhabit the same spatial realm without interfering with each other until certain conditions, special conditions occur that create that interference.
Well, David, when those conditions occur, and you get, let's just talk about EVP alone, or let's roll ITC into it as well. I mean, when you're talking about these events happening, what do you think we're hearing? Because I've heard EVP, if they're to be believed, I've heard EVP that say, somebody says, "Are you here?" and they hear nothing, and yet when they play it back, they say, you hear somebody say, "Well, of course I'm here. Where are you?" To garbled messages, to babbling, which we've actually gotten on this show before.
Yes.
I mean,
right?
what is there any kind of consistency as to, are we talking to somebody or are we just listening?
Well,
or both?
First of all, when I go into a situation, I don't interact with the environment. I record it. There are people who interact. There are different kinds of EVP, just like there are different kinds of any phenomena. There is reactive EVP, which is actually responding and interactive with the actual observer. There is what we call residual EVP, which is actually, it's like you've stepped into a moment in time where you're not fully immersed in 1864, but suddenly you're hearing the sound of the battle, or you may see some soldiers run by going to that battle. You're not there, but you are glimpsing into that time period, because time is a landscape. It's not really something that flows. It's a landscape. It's a dimension. So how you move in time is by changing your location on that landscape. So in a paranormal event, when that wormhole opens, if you are at the throat of that wormhole, you are catching a glimpse of a past time or a conceivable future time, depending on the nature of the wormhole. So EVPs can be residual, where you're hearing a moment in history, or you're hearing a special event, or it could be something that's interactive, which means that something is actually close enough to attempt communication. And, that could be anything. We can't say it's, dead Uncle Harry.
Right.
It could be an all-knowing interdimensional being that knows your thought patterns and knows exactly what you're thinking and knows how to respond to you in a manner that you'll respond.
Well, David, in that case, when you've got something that is communicating with you directly like that, has anyone ever said, "What are you? Where are you? What is this all about?" I mean, like the bigger questions. Has anyone ever, in that rare instance, ever said that? And what kind of answers would you get?
Well, we have gotten things that were anecdotal. Like we have gotten, when I was in Williamsburg doing the experiment in which we were doing the whole wormhole, try to detect the wormhole thing, we actually had an EVP that came through. There was a conversation between a man and a woman. And based on the history of the house, we believe it was the husband and wife that lived there in the late 1600s. And the man's name was William. We had a salt shaker move across the table. And right after that, we caught an EVP that said, "We are out of salt, William," from the woman.
Nice.
Okay, that's very anecdotal, but that's a very reactive kind of situation. Now, they weren't reacting to us, but then later, in the second visit, we got a "what are they doing here?" When we were, sitting with our equipment and trying to determine where in the room this EVP was coming from, we got this "what are they doing?" kind of thing. Like, what were we doing there in their domain? You know what I'm saying? So in that aspect, do you get reactive stuff? What do you think it is? I don't know. I have theories about what it may be, but is it reactive? Certainly. And yes, it can be.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, when you've gotten a reaction out of it like that, I mean, I asked Mark the same thing last week. When we talk about the issue of a time dilation or something like that you're observing something out of time. There have been, I'm sure, many stories of whatever you're looking into is also recognizing you. I mean, we had someone on that talked about two men walking across a frozen lake, and one said, "I'm on a frozen lake," and the other one said, "We're in a field and it's July." And so there was decidedly communication there that was going on, and in the end, the one that we would have perceived as a ghost or would have labeled it as such became freaked out and ran away. Because he couldn't handle this man telling him this weird stuff and dressed in very strange clothes. Shouldn't we have like a history that is fraught with stories of weird stuff from otherwise normal people seeing, I don't know, things from the alleged future? I mean, I could make the analogy that the whole UFO thing is a mirage from the future, but
I think we do. I think we do have that. I think we are seeing it come out more and more. I can tell you that psychiatrists are certainly dealing with more and more of it. Psychologists are dealing with more and more of it. Mm-hmm. Therapists are dealing with more and more of it. So I think we are seeing it. I think in the past, society wasn't conducive to revealing this type of experience.
Well, that's true, yeah. Burned at the stake and all that. Yeah.
with the advent of the TV shows and everything else, it's become more of a kitchen conversation than it has been in our history. Mm. And because of that, except possibly one exception would be during the age of spiritualism in Victorian times, it's a household conversation now. So people are more open about discussing their experiences. I mean, I meet people that I would never believe would have any kind of experience every day, and when they find out what I do, they've got a story for me. I mean, almost everyone I meet, if it didn't happen to them personally, it happened to a family member.
Right.
So I think it is a lot of it out there. I just think it has never been tabulated. It has never been, point A was never connected to point B, and so we just weren't aware of it. And I think in this day and time, with the information exchange that we have with the Internet and everything else, it's becoming more and more evident that it's probably been with us for a very long time.
Do you see an increase in the paranormal activity over the course of just the time that you've been involved in it? Have you seen an ebb and flow pattern to it? Is it getting more prevalent than it used to be or not?
No, I think it has high points and low points. It has frequency. It gets intense and then it backs away. And it's I haven't been able to establish any kind of predictable pattern with it, but there's definitely periods in my involvement where it has been more intense than others. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think again, this is conditionally based on something we don't understand yet, and I think it has to do with possibly it may not make sense to us because of our concept of time, but who knows what their concept of time is. It may be a regular routine on their side, whereas on our side, years could pass, where to them it's only a few minutes. So it's all relative to the perception of time from their perspective and our perspective. And I use the word "their" very loosely.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what we're dealing with. And to pretend that it's something else is really not the right way to go. But for lack of better terminology, there's some kind of, obviously there's anecdotal evidence that points to the involvement of other entities involved in this.
This is Mark Nesbitt. I wrote The Ghosts of Gettysburg. You are listening to Paratopia with Jeff and Jeremy.
If you record audio for any purpose, chances are you want it to be heard. You want to attract the largest audience possible who can hear your message. That's where we come in. We're cyberears.com, a revolutionary internet service that will host your audio files and help you promote and track its popularity. Considering hosting a podcast to the world? We have all the automated tools to make the process as simple and easy as it can be. No technical mumbo-jumbo to work out. CyberEars.com does all the work for you. You record it, we take care of the rest. So don't delay. Go to CyberEars.com today and register for a free trial account. Upload your audio files and get heard. With CyberEars.com, it's your audio on your terms.
Steven still has to talk about ITC.
Yeah, let's get into that.
We want to hear about SpiritCom and all that fun. So, which would you like to tackle first, ITC, or is that the same? Is it?
It's kind of one and the same, because the birth of ITC, really the anchor point for a discussion of SpiritCom and really modern day techno mediumship. Things like this Frank's box and all of this business. Mm-hmm. So I think it's quite important to anchor it in a discussion of the historic, which I would dare say, I know this from the multiple emails I get from people, just attacking and all of this, that folks don't really understand the history of EVP and what it's truly anchored in, and the misperceptions that have kind of fed on themselves and the degree to which all of this, plays. So, I think a good sound discussion of SpiritCom is probably not just a cautionary tale, not just a warning against what could become a modern Victorian era of paranormal popularity without it being undergirded by any newer approaches, So rather than make the same mistakes, if we can look at something like where this all began and a case in point like Spiricom, I think we can learn from that. So I'll start by saying from the mid-1960s to the early 1980s, research on the development of a technological means of communication with the dead was conducted by Metascience Foundation Incorporated. George W. Meek was the president of Metascience Foundation, and William J. O'Neill, a self-described psychic electronics engineer, supposedly developed a device that facilitated two-way conversation with the dead. They called it Spiricom, for spirit communication. The Spiricom project was officially defined as, and I quote, an electromagnetic etheric systems approach to communications with other levels of human consciousness. That was actually the subtitle on the Spiricom user manual. Mm-hmm. Now, the research of Meek and O'Neill, while pursued under the assumption that such an endeavor was not only possible but inevitable, was predicated upon the electronic voice phenomenon of perceived voices of unknown origin recorded on audio media. And electronic voice phenomenon collectively describes anomalously recorded sounds / now we know EMF, approximating vocal utterances as perceived by the listener. So in 1980, William O'Neill, again, this self-described psychic electronics engineer, first made contact with a supposedly discarnate being, a deceased NASA scientist named George J. Mueller. And it was done using what O'Neill called the Mark IV Spiricom. Obviously, there being a Mark I through III before this and, other Mark versions to come after. So the Mark IV Spiricom device essentially consisted of, we'll keep it basic, 13 audio oscillators, each tuned to an audio frequency that was presumed to approximate the tone range for an adult male voice should a discarnate being require a voice box. There was a radio transmitter tuned to 29.57 megahertz and a radio receiver tuned to the same. And there's a variety of other equipment that may have been a part of Spiricom apparatus, such as what we've come to learn was an artificial larynx device. So, while providing details of the Spiricom components, at some level, O'Neill really didn't provide the guts of it, as like the plans were really just block diagrams, okay? And actual schematics were never, if they were made, they were certainly never made available. So you really have this ill-defined apparatus. This character O'Neill claimed he was able to hold two-way conversations with spirits of the dead, some of which he recorded and made available to George Meek, who was O'Neill's benefactor. So the results of O'Neill's experiments in ITC, this instrumental transcommunication, a type of, techno mediumship, these experiments, the results, I should say, were announced at a Washington, D.C. press conference on April 6, 1982, by George Meek with a panel of Metascience affiliates. At the time, they were all kind of, if not big names, at least, minor players that folks following the New Age movement and all that would have known. So Meek both published and announced that the Spiricom recordings and materials were being provided to the public, and so they were. So these created quite a firestorm, really, although looking back without, the benefit of quote unquote being there, it doesn't look like the firestorm of a popular fad like we might take it today. In a YouTube world where something catches on and gets 1 million hits, this wasn't quite that dynamic at play. But to be clear, there were hundreds of press clippings in the Metascience Foundation's archives that I've had unfettered access to. And so this is clear that this wasn't just a big deal in the U.S. among paranormal enthusiasts, but also it was an internationally recognized event.
Well, I don't understand how that works. If all you've really got is his word that he didn't do anything screwy, how does that become news? I mean, how did that catch on? Because he, like you said, he didn't have a device that actually worked, and you just had to believe that the voice, he didn't make it up.
Well, I'll tell you what, sir. Why don't I shut the system down, switch over to this other RF generator, and see if it's stable now, sir.
Right. Well, you're right. There's definitely an undiscerning mind would kind of come to this evidence set and make a conclusion that O'Neill was talking to dead people. I concede that point, but this was not the initial take on the evidence. It was really either outright debunked by many, and probably quite rightly so, but it was accepted by those who were kind of looking for belief system confirming evidence anyway. And this really speaks to the problem of the birth of ITC. Modern day techno mediums who use different devices resort to referring to this Scientific American article with Edison's attempt to communicate with the dead. Now, interestingly, George Meek refers to the Scientific American article in just about everything the guy ever wrote. There's a mythology really surrounding Edison's attempt to communicate with the dead, a mythology surrounding this that's really this article. It's often referred to but rarely reproduced and read by anyone, because a careful read of the actual 1926 Scientific American of the interview with Edison shows that Edison really made no such claims. In fact, the actual title is not Edison's attempt to communicate with the dead, period. The actual title is Edison's attempt to communicate with the dead, ? And in this article, Edison is merely responding in hypothetical terms like we've been doing tonight with so much, just kind of, thought experiment stuff. No one should take something David has said tonight, for example, and then sit in on his dissertation and say, aha, you see, Rountree believes that there are elves, who hammer out silver discs. I mean, that'd be preposterous, right? It's a discussion. Now, Edison did the same thing and said, well, responding in hypothetical terms to the reporter's line of inquiry, there was really no indication or reason to conclude that Edison was personally engaged in building a device to communicate with the dead. But the title alone and the fact that almost no one has read it has got the likes of Chris Moon claiming that he's in communication with Edison, who told him he's one of the 30-something people who knows how to use the device, and so come to him, or there are others. But the point is, a careful read shows that it's all mythology. Edison's comments were actually rather derogatory to spiritualists and those involved in psychic spiritism. His comments, however, do support the notion that, and I quote, here's an actual quote from the 1926 article, quote, "If we are to make any real progress in psychic investigation, we must do it with scientific apparatus and in a scientific manner." Well, that much I think everyone can agree with. That's what Edison said. Edison also does state, in fairness to the folks who have misinterpreted it, Edison does state, quote, "I've been thinking for some time of a machine or apparatus which could be operated by personalities which have passed on to another existence or sphere. However, he immediately tempered his speculation with the warning, quote, "Now follow me carefully. I don't claim that our personalities pass on to another existence or sphere. I don't claim anything because I don't know anything about the subject." So what he was doing was clearly responding to a reporter who essentially like accosted him on the street right around Halloween looking for a story. And Edison, speaking in hypothetical terms, cautions him that we need to do all this in a scientific manner with scientific apparatus. And he does say, well, I've been thinking some time of a machine which might do this, because Edison lived in the times when this type of phenomenon was on every street corner, was all the rage, and things like rappings were taken as serious communication from the dead. So context is everything. And I would then put forward the reason why this is so often misinterpreted is because I think it's a willing misinterpretation of the article to kind of bolster the cult of technomediumship. That's my take on it. I think that's what George Meek was doing. That's what I think the modern day folks with the Frank Boxes and the Chris Moons, and I think this is what they're doing by intentionally misinterpreting that article.
Did they make a lot of money off of SpiritCom, or what do you think it was about for them personally?
Well, no, that's see, that's two separate things. What it was about personally and did they make money, two separate questions, tied at some level, tied at the nexus of one man, William O'Neill, let's say. William O'Neill, again, is the operator. And yes, there was a financial motivation for O'Neill. It is undeniable from the open SpiritCom literature written by, Meek himself, written by John Fuller. Yes, that's the same John Fuller, by the way, who documented the Betty and Barney Hill story, for those looking for yet another UFO overlap. When John Fuller recounted the entire story, he also was real clear about this, that while not a quid pro quo, there was a direct relationship between the amount and quality of evidence that O'Neill would produce and how frequently Meek would fund his operations. And, the situation of William O'Neill was really a dire and very sad one. I don't say anything about to say to mock the guy, because he was really kind of a kind of offbeat and charming character, really, in a lot of ways. I think I would have enjoyed his company and got a real kick out of him. But he did find his life unwound by deep investigation into the paranormal. I don't know if the trickster was opening too many hatches and he was just falling right through, or if he had a type of latent schizotypy that might have been awakened or activated by this kind of paramimetic infection. Who knows? I don't know. In other words, that, to put it in a simple way, I don't know if he was crazy before he came to the field or if the field made him crazy. But all that being said, he lived in this burnt-out husk of a home, which he called a lab. His wife moved out of the house. He's just financially falling apart. And his one source of steady income is his benefactor, George Meek. And so you can see already there's this biased dynamic to the to the evidence collection process and all that. So, I don't think I need to state the obvious. I don't mean to assassinate the man's character, because I think the bulk of what he did was to go to the latter point of your question, was for this personal reason, which I think is why a lot of folks are in it. I don't think anyone's really getting rich off EVP and ITC. To the contrary, it costs so many so much. But I think what O'Neill got out of it, I think it's what a lot of folks, probably getting out of it. I've got this working, I dare to call it a theory, of an irrational memetics, the meme, the idea of an infectious idea, bringing into question how much is anomaly and how much is anomalous perception. I think O'Neill was taken by the para-meme. I think O'Neill was incapable of many critical faculties that other people have, and so it was this kind of perfect storm of this man who fancied himself a healer and this, offbeat mystic and techno medium, combined with the fact that he might have had some type of schizotypy at the time. So he was adopting all these extra cognitive conclusions as beliefs, and then the person is motivated, as you've seen from world religions. We don't need to get specific, but you've seen that ideas are spread and reinforced in believers, and the afterlife meme kind of evolved into this notion of communication with the afterlife or communication with the dead meme. It's peculiar to EVP and ITC as dogma, really, but it is still just another self-sealing doctrine type like we see in so many belief systems. So really what he got out of it was uncritical beliefs became his belief system. And so when those become intractable, evidence in support of your beliefs becomes the very motivation. Not to mention, again, that, this was one of his only sources of income.
No, I just turned the TV camera on, sir. What did you say, William? I said I just turned the TV camera on. Oh, very well. You never know, Doctor. Yes, I understand, William. All right, now, very well. Now let's get on with this. And what I suggest, William, is that we disregard this audio project. Audio project? Yes, in your words, spirit home, and get on with the television aspects. Oh, I see. Yeah, I see. How much better it would be, not only to be able to speak, but to visualize the subject that we're speaking to. You understand, William? Yeah, I understand. Just a minute, sir. Just a minute.
So, going by that then, are you saying that when he would sit there and actually create, these EVP or this SpiritCom chat, that he was not aware that that's what he was doing? Or
well, to be clear, I am not a psychologist, but what I do know is that William O'Neill died in the care of Deary State Mental Hospital in Pennsylvania. And he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So this tells me that he very well could not have been entirely responsible for his, acting out his delusions. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, the reason he was so highly effective at these particular, delusions on tape in the form of, SpiritCom was because he had the skill set of a ventriloquist. And I can prove this as well because not only did he concede the point that he was a ventriloquist on a child's television show while in Cincinnati in John Fuller's book called The Ghost of 29 Megacycles, he joked frequently with Meek about this ventriloquism and how people will just call it ventriloquism. And then the fact that he was in possession of an electrolarynx and the SpiritCom recordings sound like an electrolarynx, except to be clear, they sound like an electrolarynx that's kind of misused. You're supposed to, if you have a laryngectomy, you're supposed to have this electrolarynx device up near your throat. But if you simply use your oral cavity for modulation of the electrolarynx sound, it's been proven by Dr. David Rivers, a professional speech pathologist, that the SpiritCom recordings sound precisely like a misused electrolarynx device. And the reason that's important is because the videotapes I have of O'Neill operating the device, O'Neill is always with his back to the camera. O'Neill is always with his hands essentially resting on a countertop or sometimes making hand gestures, lending credibility because people are saying, well, I know it kind of sounds like this device, but look, he never picks one up. However, if among the rack of devices in front of the guy, he simply had this thing mounted and the oscillating tone were just running constantly, if he just simply put his mouth in approximation of the electrolarynx device, he wouldn't have to say anything. He'd have to move his mouth as if he were using his ventriloquist skill set between his spoken words.
And he admitted that he had this device?
No, he didn't make it wildly admitted. However, I having unfettered access to the to the Metascience archives, not only did I find a manifest of the O'Neill lab, and I use that term very loosely, a manifest of all the materials that were moved out of O'Neill's lab. The electrolarynx is listed, but I found a secondhand electrolarynx in the Metascience archive vault, so to speak, and Meek himself discussed in the I don't know if this is stupidity or daring or something, but Meek himself mentioned in the first edition, the first draft and release to members only of the Metascience Foundation, he spoke about the organization having possession of an electrolarynx. That was later taken out of editions, probably for obvious reasons. But so you have all of this bearing upon it, and in retrospect, it seems silly. But in very contemporary times, it was touted as, the holy grail of EVP. This is real-time two-way communication with the dead. And look, the voice from the other side is helping this intuitive with his circuitry and all of this. So I guess at some level, to the to the mind of someone in 1980s and maybe someone without electronic sophistication, and the fact that O'Neill, in their defense, was really putting forward a very black box technology, and him being completely unaware of the cognitive nature of his own delusions, well, I think it was the perfect storm, and it really caught fire. Now, why do I think this is an important case? Like, why should anyone care or really, give a crap about Spiritcom? And it is because of all the cautionary tales. Clearly, you can descend, like Alice down this rabbit hole. You can descend through the looking glass, and things can get really weird. And a guy like O'Neill could not come back from that. And a guy like Meek, George Meek, really a self-made millionaire. He had lots of patents to his name and some pretty great contracts with, Defense Department and stuff.
Meek knew that he was schizophrenic.
Yeah, Meek knew, but in Meek's framework for understanding became a more mystical one as time went on, and so by the time he met O'Neill, the reasoning. I'm not saying this is like an actual reason. I'm saying the reasoning for O'Neill being gripped by this problem of schizophrenia was, well, clearly it's not schizophrenia. Meek thought, well, he must be, struggling with demons, kind of literally, you see. And so if he just had been exorcised over the telephone, as I have tape recordings of, or if he stopped drinking and was exorcised via the telephone, a la David Jacobs with Everwoods. But, so, it didn't work. O'Neill obviously ended up in a mental facility and died in a kind of palliative care situation.
I'm glad the Jacobs thing has gotten to other fields.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't know how he's eluded, well, anyway, that's a whole other problem.
Yeah, well, I don't know how he's eluded ufology, but yet here you ghost guys are aware. But so nobody back then, or did they? A doctor step forward, a skeptic, and say, hey, this is a larynx device. Yeah. In fact... so what do you think that says about the rest of us, where, he's a ventriloquist, you've got the evidence that it's a larynx device, and yet our will to believe that over the evidence?
Well, it does say a lot, but in fairness to those who were taken in at the time, and I'm really not one to defend such a thing, but in fairness to those, you would need to look at all of the open literature to put together the pieces as convincingly as I've just laid them out. A paragraph here, a page there, the first draft of a manual here, the actual on-site investigation and unfettered access to the archives there. So in retrospect, this is a much easier story to explain. But to speak to your larger point, when you've got Fate magazine, not exactly the biggest bunch of skeptics, when you've got Fate magazine out there hosting articles called Spiritcom or Spiritcon, and that I willingly admit that they came up with it first, though I'd come up with it, and then someone said, hey, there was an article called that. But in that Fate magazine article, they mentioned this Dr. David Rivers, who had kind of been asked, will you authenticate this stuff? You are a speech pathologist. Is there anything nuanced about the speech? Is there something we should know at a vocal signature level? Just kind of asked to look at it. And him being a guy who deals in speech pathology quite broadly, he said, hey, that sounds like an electrolarynx. And let me see if I couldn't make my voice sound like this voice. And he couldn't when he used it properly, but then he could when it was used improperly. So what does that say about folks who would read Fate magazine and continue on believing it? I think what it says is that despite the logical fallacies that abound in the Spiricom story, there is some sort of there must be a need in people for, if not the creation of a paranormal ethos or the adoption of fringe ideas as a belief system. There certainly is a method by which those ideas are spread and reinforced in believers. I think that's what it says. Mm-hmm. I think it says people don't bring the entirety of their critical faculties to, stuff before they go believe it. That's why, and I don't know if I'm coining this, but I think it describes it perfectly. That's why people go around, adopting extra cognitive conclusions as beliefs. Is it reality avoidance? Yeah, for some people probably. Does something like the Spiricom story or this the meme surrounding EVP-ITC that you're talking to dead people, does that hold some explanatory scheme of power for people because of their framework of understanding? Might be kind of a religious or a spiritual one. Yeah, probably. Is there a cultish nature to all of this? Like, this cult of techno-mediumship and this psychological dynamic of one-upsmanship, which is kind of similar to a lot of the abductees I'd mentioned, just to kind of tie it in for the folks who are well-read in the UFO stuff. Yeah, probably it's a cult of techno-mediumship. But I think there's something deeper. I think we need to look at really what's called the psychobiological explanation for the creation of a paranormal ethos. I think it's important to not just listen to the audio cassettes of Spiricom and say, hey, cool, but to also look at what EVP findings are interpreted as. David speaks clearly about what they are from a data standpoint, but what are they interpreted as? Mm-hmm. And what does, given the contribution of the Spiricom, quote-unquote, evidence to the already existing EVP-ITC mythology, what is the role Spiricom played in the expansion and spread of the mythos at the popular level? And I would say, were there no Spiricom, there would be no ghost hunters on Sci-Fi. And the people who write me, to tie it back in 20 minutes ago now, the people who write me and say, Spiricom's not important, I've never heard of Spiricom. Why are you going to hang the yay or nay on EVP, on the Spiricom case alone? I have to remind them of two things. Well, one, I say Spiricom case closed, EVP case open. That's the first thing. I do not throw away the EVP baby with the Spiricom bathwater. But you do have to look at this supposed, what was really touted as the best evidence, this was amazing real-time communication. You have to look at why people believed it, how that meme spread, and how to avoid that type of irrational memetics in the future so that the entire field, so far as it is a field, isn't taken in by the next big dumb idea.
Well, gentlemen, I think that is a great place to leave it for now. Do you have a website that you would like people to go to? www.audiomedium/spiricomstudy.com. And David?
Mine is spinvestigations.org.
Thank you both for coming on. This has been
so
fascinating that I immediately want to do another episode. But
yeah, let's do it.
Are you guys still going to do a 2-hour thing for the next round of Paratopia?
Heck yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Very good. So look forward to that, everybody. All right. Well, Dr. Stephen Rourke and David Rountree, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, guys.
You've been listening to Paratopia with Jeffrey Ritzmann and Jeremy Vaeni, and I could care less.
Well, Jeff Ritzmann, that was a pretty
Really
incredible episode. And for you, probably the best you could ask for under the circumstances.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what those circumstances are.
We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, I guess. I mean, there's just, another freaking moron that's come to, that's walked along to malign us all.
Right.
And, and it's par for the course. I mean, again, I kind of in our Rountree and Rourke interview mentioned the notion of the whole trickster theorem and all of that, and they acknowledged that. But I mean, how perfect is it that in one week's show we talk about we're not going to discuss or respond to the nonsense and the attacks. We're done with that. And everybody's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then, like a tidal wave, they come forth.
Right.
Worse than normal. I mean, you're always being somewhat public and having a public discussion like this. You're bound to attract some of that, but it just came in droves after that. And then not long after that, we make another statement that essentially we're not going to continue the show on as it has been with the two of us bringing guests on and talking to them about it, because we really kind of like said what we needed to say. And par for the course, it just seems like, I don't know, I'll say it. I think it just feels like the phenomena of reality, whatever you want to call it, is kind of bending to drag us back into it in some kind of way, in a conflict sort of way, knowing, of course, the personality that I have, which is, if you're attacked, the answer is to respond to it and to end it. And I won't do that. I'm just going to let it go because, I'll put it this way: what's being said elsewhere is so absolutely retarded, it's not even worth answering to.
Well, here's the thing, just to give people some setup. There's someone else who, has made it his life's mission to attack us, but he's so fucking inept and everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie or just wrong information that anyone who listens to him knows that. In fact, nobody has said to us, gee, is this any of this true? Because
right.
You go to listen and you're like, yeah, no, none of this is true. And none of it is true. But of course, it's the kind of thing where the less attention we pay to him, the more attention he tries to get. And so we're not going to say his name on the air here because that would just be too perfect for him. But I do think it's important to bring up because his behavior, I mean, as, someone who has been on a radio show or two, he comes across as sort of a likable yokel. Like you just think, oh gosh golly, that's one cute dumb guy. But what's not cute is that in his zeal to go after us, he has gone after our friends on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Put slanderous remarks under friends of mine from high school's children's photographs. Called up my friends and colleagues in this field to try to badmouth me and try to turn my friends against me. I mean, calling people at their home. I mean, so it's this like almost sociopathic or perhaps sociopathic, I don't know, building of just, wow, look at me, pay attention to me. That doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. Now he's sort of dedicated his show to getting us and, but under the, of course, ironic moniker or bullshit of, those guys are egotistical. The week that we decide to give our show over to the audience is the week that we're called egotistical and arrogant. But by an egomaniacal sociopath. So, it's not fun, and we're not the only ones. I mean, this is the thing that really bothers me. He said on his Facebook page, Biedny, talking about Dave Biedny and talking about the Paracast, says Biedny is a fat, crying baby puking on his mother's milk, whatever that means. Hopefully he stays gone for good. Their style of attacking someone like they have done with Dolan and others is a big turnoff for me. It's why I will never listen to their show. Then he goes on in another post to talk about them and says, sounds ego-filled and angry to me, but that seems to be the way to get popular, isn't it? The Paracast way. Who's supposed to be such legends that everyone tries to imitate and talk about or bitch about. Fuck all that. Never listen to them. And you know what? I never will. Doing my own gig. Paracast influence free. So if you've never listened to them, then how do you know anything about them? So that's lie number one. But I just want to say that, we've had our differences with Dave. Obviously,
oh, yeah.
We've had a very public falling out. We used to be friends. And obviously, I still don't care about the current incarnation of the Paracast. But you can't hold their jock.
That's very true.
So you don't know what you're saying, and you're just trying to make a name for yourself by, getting famous off of other people. And, I get it, and that's all well and good, but the sociopathic horseshit has to stop. There's no going on the air and pretending to be this kind, sweet, gosh golly victim of something, which is also a lie. But then, going, and calling people in their homes and calling women the worst names you can call them, sending homophobic hate mail to a lesbian colleague and friend of the show, simply because they're friends of the show? I mean, that's not something you do, dude. So if anyone doesn't know who I'm talking about in ufology, and you don't want to support this type of behavior, feel free to send me an email or give me a ring or whatever, and I'll be glad to tell you exactly who it is, so you can stay away from their show. But you're right. I mean, it's this kind of thing that does drive one a little loopy. Because it is, on the one hand, it's this sociopathic odd response that is personal to the moron trying to make a name for himself and trying to feel like he is someone off the backs of others in a field like this, if that makes any sense.
Right.
But, like you said, there's the other element of this sort of trickstery thing that seems to steer these people our way just when we want to call it quits,
Right.
And then what does that say about somebody when you're like, well, we're calling it quits, and then they're like, well, we're going to just keep attacking you. Yeah. I'm sorry, what? We're not even allowed to leave?
They're throwing tomatoes as you leave the building. Yeah. I mean, I don't... I've had two people write me and say, you do know about this, right? And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. It's irrelevant to me.
Yeah, I don't care what he says on the show. I don't care about the lies and
what I don't like is the peripheral stuff, like calling people on the phone and giving them a bunch of guff and the heinous Facebook stuff that you put under somebody else's child. I mean, really? That's ridiculous, and that just makes you think.
And you just had a child yourself.
Right,
We're talking about a new father here, too, so that's...
that's what's even more...
comes on our message board as different people to try to spam our message board saying, listen to this show, are we a nail in the coffin of Paratopia? It's like...
Yeah, not so much.
No, you're more like a zit on the ass of ufology is what you are.
Yeah.
But you're another reminder of why it's important for us to leave, and I'll tell you, Jeff, we've been discussing this, and I think I have one final revelation for ufology before I go. Which I think you agree with, which is that ultimately this field of study is a mirror, and it is reflecting back at us. The more you give, the more you get.
Right.
It's reflecting back at us what we are. And so when you see this hypothetical disclosure scenario, or what if aliens came down, we're seeing it now with Stephen Hawking, was talking about this type of thing. Well, we don't know what aliens would be like, but we do know what we would be like because we're seeing it. Because here we have a hypothetical situation. We have experiencers of something, and we have people theorizing about that. So basically, what we've got with this field is humankind going up against, brain-wise, thought-wise, an unknown, a hypothetical unknown.
Right.
And so just in the hypothetical, not with aliens actually having come here and landed or anything, look what we have done. We have become aggressive, backstabbing, religious believers It reminds me of, like, in 2001 Space Odyssey, where, the apes see the obelisk and they touch it. Now all of a sudden they've learned something and they've learned how to use tools.
Right.
It's like we're touching the obelisk and we're not learning anything. We're learning how to eat our own. Like, that's what we've learned.
Yeah. Well,
why don't they land? Because this is why they don't land. And then the other part of that is we're always saying, well, this thing hides in the shadows. It's clandestine, right? It doesn't want to be known, and therefore it must be nefarious. But truth of the matter is, we're nefarious, and any of the good researchers in this field are clandestine. Jacques Vallée has left the building, and yet he's still doing research. NARCAP has, as an organization, never entered the building. Changed the term UFO to UAP.
Right.
Phil Imbrogno has left the building, but is still researching the paranormal. And so I think you see this exodus from the field of people who get what the field is, even if they don't get what the phenomenon is. And we call those people heroes. But when the phenomenon hides from us, we call that evil. I'm just not buying that. All I know is what I can see in the mirror, and what I see is not pretty, and it ain't them, it's me. And I don't want to be me anymore. I don't want to be that reflection.
Yeah. I mean, how many people now have exited because, well, it all goes back to what I heard McKenna say on a lecture, which was, you have this very interesting phenomena, the UFO thing, and God only knows what that is. But then you have the bigger problem, which is the UFO community. And then he goes on to describe the UFO community is some of the most half-witted, mush-minded people you'd ever hope to encounter, and I think he's right. And again, that certainly doesn't bear any witness to our audience, by and large, or any of our guests or anything like that. I think we've done our best to have people on this show that that are not of that ilk. We've done our best to avoid that element at every turn. But unfortunately, for me, this comes down to a log pile. I mean, it just piles on. And maybe that's a sociological thing. When you say you're leaving, the pile-ons just start to happen. Miniature ones and bigger ones. Nevertheless, if you think that doesn't grate on you and make you go, what am I even doing this for? Why would anyone want to be subjected to this? That's at the point where you're ready to step away. And so that's essentially my thing right now. I mean, what are you going to do? 5 more episodes of this?
Yeah, I'm going to go to 70. I know. So, the revelation here is that Jeff is going to bail out now, and I'm going to bail. I've got a few more that I want to do. But honestly, I think that this is the perfect episode for you to go on, because this is all the shit that you love, and I think
it is.
You've gotten some new threads to pull on.
Well, it is, and and I'll say this: it's like I've been talking about for a while of kind of switching gears and kind of studying the paranormal from a different angle, which would be the ghost thing, because I am exceedingly intrigued by it, and I feel in many ways that it's a lot more hands-on than most of the paranormal endeavors out there. And so that's what I would like to do. I mean, I would really like to talk to David Rountree some more about his work, what he's found, the devices that he's using, and how he's measuring things. I find that completely enthralling in studying this. And but I can tell you that he's got it right, which is don't be a voice in this. Don't be a public voice. That's where the problem happens. And that's certainly where it's happened for me. And like we said before, you think you get into this to do some good, and you come at it with the best of intentions, but it doesn't want you. It doesn't want that. And so the best way to do it is just as so many have done it, Phil Imbrogno and Jacques Vallée, which is to drop away and do it on your own. And that's it. I mean, and so that's essentially what I'm doing. We're still going to continue on with the thing with the user-generated content and all of that.
I want to say one thing about that, too, which is...
Yeah.
Part of me is like, gee, I sure hope a whole lot of people don't want to do it, and then I can just go away. I honestly, if it becomes a flood of people who want to do it, there are now, I think, 4 people, which is like a month's worth of episodes.
Yeah.
Which is fine, which is a fine start. But if it doesn't go beyond that and this thing fails, I'm fine with that. Because I think this could be something, and Jeff, you had pointed this out to me, where people say, that's a great idea, that's really brilliant, and then don't actually want to participate in it.
Right.
They just like it in theory. And if that happens, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with leaving. If it takes off, I guess I'll deal with that too. But part of me right now is just like, you just need a vacation or something.
Well, I think that you're probably coming to the same realization that I am, that you're not going to do any good as a public figure.
Well, that's just it. It's because of what I said. To me, it's like, that was my big aha moment. Oh, I get it. This whole thing is our response to the unknown. This whole thing.
Yes.
There is no, what would happen if aliens landed? Would we shake their hands? Would we put guns on them? No, this is the virtual reality model for contact that we are seeing unfold before our eyes.
Absolutely.
And that model has shown us go from informed, inquisitive research straight down into egomaniacal war, charlatans, religious fanaticism. I just had dinner with some ufologists who I like,
right?
Who I think are good people.
Right.
And yet one of them is friends with David Jacobs, and one of the others said, I just don't understand this Emma Woods thing. Can you explain it? And I explained it, and the other guy, you could see him getting hostile and just started parroting what Jacobs had said. And I said, well, did you look at any of what Emma Woods put online? Well, no. Well, but she's got a borderline personality disorder. He showed me the definition. This is unbelievable. Think. Yeah, I know this is your friend, but think. And then, I'm listening to the conversation, and on the one hand, you've got this contactee and his wife who are talking about alien bases and inside of a mountain, and, they've got a treaty with the government, because with our government, even though it's in South America.
Right.
Because, we've got weapons, and we shot them down during Roswell, and they don't want that to happen again. It's like, and they're like, don't you know that? She's saying this to me. I mean, what do you think happened at Roswell? We shot them down. And I'm like, I think I don't know what happened at Roswell. Any other answer is a lie.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing. And then you've got the researcher friend who, again, I like, and so I'm not going to name him and embarrass him. But he's rolling his eyes at that nonsense because he thinks his nonsense makes sense, which is, the stereotypical Bud Hopkins Jacob scenario of gray aliens creating hybrids, taking over, blah, blah.
Right.
It's like two subsets of complete horseshit, and, each one of them thinks they're right. And if I were a phenomenon looking at this, no, I wouldn't reveal myself either. I might just sit back and laugh and torture people with tricksterisms.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you're saying. I mean, it's just...
And can I just say one thing too? I'm sorry, Jeff.
Yeah.
And then I will completely shut up.
Okay.
It just dawned on me just now that this whole thing about Emma Woods having a borderline personality disorder and that she just goes on, her whole life is about taking down Jacobs. That's all she's going to do is go on shows and message boards and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I haven't talked to her about this, so I don't know if I should be saying this, but fuck it. It's one of our last shows, right?
Okay.
Pretty
Be
much.
careful.
No, it's nothing horrible. In fact, it's nothing at all, really. I just haven't, run it by her. But the day after her episode aired with us, she got offered 2 shows. One was Wes Owsley's The Black Fridays, and the other was Unknown Country with Whitley Strieber. They both contacted her and said, will you do my show? And she said no, because she felt like doing the one show, thankfully ours, was enough to sort of get the point across, and that anything else would be overkill. And she may change her mind in the future. Who knows? Maybe she'll go on these shows. But the point is, if she were somebody who were a borderline personality disorder doing everything in her power to destroy him, Strieber's Dreamland is probably second to Coast in terms of paranormal popularity.
Yeah.
That would be the way to go. She didn't take it.
Right.
So that's the end. There's your evidence that he's full of shit.
Yeah. Well, I think that episode for me, and that whole story for me just kind of exemplified what's wrong in this for me, and that it can get a lot more serious than the garden variety wrongdoing in a research capacity. You know, it can get a lot worse than that. And so I think that was a point where I said, yeah, I need to kind of come out of my little vacation mode to talk about this, because it was something I'd been talking about for a long time. But, you know, everybody knows that at this point that when I took my vacation, I was on the verge of bailing out of this anyway. And I think anybody who's followed any of my stuff for the many years that it's been around on the net knows that I dropped away from this years ago for about 3 to 4 years, I think. And that was over not even remotely the same issues. That was over just the heaping helping of weirdness and the heaping helping of what I would say was, I guess everybody, I mean, Jeremy, would you know what I mean when I say well thought out paranoia?
Yeah.
I mean, when you've got guys coming to your workplace and saying, stop talking about this or that, or stay away from this case or that case, or, you know, bad things can happen, and then you have somebody follow you home. And so it's like that all became all too real to me. And I have to be honest and say that before that all of that happened, I largely considered that to be a fantasy. I thought that was just people being paranoid, because the field does and will make you paranoid. But you know, I found out all too quickly that weird stuff like that does happen. Whether or not that was really what it was didn't matter either way. I personally believe that it was, and I'll stand by that. But even if it had been some sort of misunderstanding or miscommunication or whatever, it was still equally terrifying to have something like that happen. And so I dropped away because, frankly, I was afraid not all that much about myself, but I was more worried about my family than I was anything else. And so when it affects to that level, that's at the point where I say I need to walk away from this. I need to give it up and not engage it. And I think for me, and I'm going to be completely upfront with our audience, because, you know, why stop being that now, is that this show and the aggravation that has ensued from everything from the Emma Woods thing to this current thing to stuff all the way back when we started this show, all of that has taken a very large chunk of my time and my focus and my effort. And it's taken a great deal of me away from my family, away from art, away from music, all the things that I really love. And, you know, and it's time to, again, step back, step out of this in a public way and start refocusing on doing my own research when it suits my own goddamn schedule instead of a weekly thing. And it's not that I disliked doing this show. I'm very proud of the show. I mean, I thank every one of you again. If we didn't do that before, I'll do it again. I thank everybody who listened to this, every guest that we ever had on the show. I thank you all a lot for your support, both monetary and you know, through emails and just words of encouragement in what we did. But unfortunately, as often happens with this stuff, it's just gotten to this critical mass level that is like, I don't want to be involved anymore. And so I want to read this because I wrote this today as kind of like, I didn't want to just exit this show and not say goodbye or thank people that I should have. So anyway, I want to read this. I said, well, we've said that episode 70 is our final episode, but I'm sorry to say I won't be around for that. I have in recent days become so utterly fed up with not only this field, but the morons who inhabit it, in conjunction with those of us who are truly seeking answers, which I think is a lot of our audience. I think a lot of our audience falls into an open-minded mindset, but one that is critical and one that is desperate to see this field get transformed in some meaningful way. But unfortunately, all of us in this field have ended up with the dregs of societal failure, being involved in causing nothing but discourse in their search for fame. Unfortunately, those of us who have a professional career or notoriety outside this UFO subject and aren't looking to be famous, there's no application for involvement in this subject. You can't accept or reject anyone from being heard. It's all free reign. And that, to me, is one of the biggest problems in this field. So these are my last words to this show, our audience. And I just want to tell you guys, I think you know, largely because of what we've said on the show, I think you know what I've come to as far as this subject. But these are kind of side bylines that are a little bit broader in scope and maybe a little bit separate from the phenomena itself. And so this is what I want to leave you with. This subject, this field, is a completely futile endeavor. And I'm hearing a lot of people gasp at that, especially at me saying that. I said here, it consumes not only by virtue of the search for the phenomena, but it consumes via those involved who seek confrontation and fame through any means necessary. I think we all know what that's about. We've seen this for years. It's not just this recent stuff, but for years we've seen this kind of behavior in this field. Another item, trust no one. Now, it sounds like, the X-Files maybe got one thing right, but maybe it's a bit extreme. I mean, you can find those in this who are your kindred spirits and those who are just golden to you. And if you all can band together in some way and shelter each other from vicious attacks and fights that ensue from dispelling nonsense and engaging the real research, then more power to you. I don't know that that's possible because you're dealing with all sorts of different personalities and all sorts of different belief systems and ideologies that don't work together. Ultimately, this field will break you. It's made serious researchers go to ground or become far less public than they used to be. The brilliant mind of Dr. Jacques Vallée being only one of many. I, of course, believe there is a legitimate phenomena going on. But I also believe it's a rough-ass teacher with no remorse whatsoever. And since Jeremy and I have said we refuse to acknowledge the garbage has come full tilt into our laps. Since telling this field we're leaving, it's multiplied. So I think I said before that it feels like a jilted lover. And I've got here what I wrote down was, I'm leaving you, meaning us saying that. And the phenomena's response is, the hell you are. You aren't going anywhere. I want to qualify that statement just briefly. Not only are we being publicly maligned, it's not just that. It's that, and here's a little weirdness for you. When we went to record the Mark Nesbitt episode, I believe, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, that's when we said we were going to halt things in a normal way for this show. Mm-hmm. During the course of taping that show, everybody knows we caught some sort of sound or breath that is not us. That wasn't all that happened. We also had objects fly off my shelf behind me, in the room I sit in to do the show, which Jeremy heard. He didn't see because my camera wasn't pulled around far enough. I also had a very weird instance with Jeremy's webcam, where one moment he is sitting up reading me an email before we did the show, and his image at times becomes pixelated from the lag on the internet. It's common. You see it all the time. But what's weird is only he dissolved away. The room, the whole picture didn't dissolve, just him. And then he completely disappeared and snapped to a sitting up position, looking at me through the widest eyes I've ever seen on Jeremy, with his mouth gaped open like he was scared to death. And then an instant later, it snapped back to him reading and being in time with his voice. His voice never stopped, but the image changed instantly and drastically to a position he had not even taken during our entire conversation.
And Jeff pretty much jumped across the room at that point.
Yeah,
like,
I did.
And I'm like, what are you doing, dude?
Yeah, I mean, it freaked me out pretty good. And there's been some other things that have happened just around my space that have been what feels like, come on, you're not going to go anywhere. You know you don't want to leave because now I'm going to show you this. And so I feel like it's that seduction going on all over again because when you become attuned to this a little bit more acutely than most, you start to see patterns in it. And I'm definitely seeing similar patterns as to the first time that I walked away from this. So what I wrote here is this phenomenon knows how you work. I am, and here's my admittance to everybody, a control freak by simple example. I fear this phenomena because I fear a loss of control when I encounter it. There's nothing more exemplified in a loss of control than a loss of your own personal image. In other words, an attack by someone else. You feel a deep-seated need to address it, to fight it, to argue it, and to prove it wrong. And there it is again. You're not going anywhere. See, and so therefore, what I'm getting at there is that this thing knows how I react. Whatever this is all about, it knows how I react. And yes, there's a sociological part to this, but I believe there's also something that's deliberate about it, in the sense that anybody who listens to this show knows this, is that, what did I spend a year and a half up against the Meyer case, and, just couldn't let it go, no matter how ridiculous it got, every attack that they leveled at me, I responded to. And that's a foolish thing to do. I learned my lesson with that. So I have learned certain things in this field. I've learned certain things about people, but I believe there's something else that's going on here that's under the current of what we see as a sociological problem, or even a psychological problem. To continue with what I wrote, the phenomena fascinates me. I will continue to study it on my own, but I will no longer subject myself to being any sort of public voice in it. As I said on a previous show, I find the UFO field to be a goddamn embarrassment. I'm also interested in other paranormal studies, in particular, the ghost phenomena. But my same stance will be taken. I will study it on my own, for me, and I will not be a public voice in it of any kind. So don't expect me to turn around and start a ghost podcast. Someone asked me about the book that I was writing about my experiences and all of that, and my experiences in ufology. And I have to be honest and say I have little interest in doing it since this community has taken such a distinct downturn. What I wrote here is, why would I share anything anymore with this community at large? Because it's like trying to paint my own Mona Lisa and throwing it to the monkeys. So what is the point? And here, at the end of my second multiple years of involvement, I have lost friends I cared about, become depressed, frustrated, and senselessly maligned. Big reward. There have been big connections that I will hold on to. Colin Andrews, Mark Nesbitt, Bruce Maccabee, George Hansen, Dennis McKenna, Jeremy Vaeni, and others. There have been these glimmers of awe-inspiring events to me, and instances that Jeremy and I have encountered both together in person and together on this show. And I think the most recent thing that I could say would be Colin Andrews' episode. I think that something happened. I don't know what happened, but something, if you listen to that show, was in the air. So there is something here. And then I go on to write, however, it doesn't want to be found. And it aggressively defends its agenda, whatever that might be, by throwing you and your life and personality, as well as many others, into complete disarray. This thing feels more like Caesar watching the gladiators being bound, burned, and dying by the sword for entertainment than any sort of enlightenment to me. Terence McKenna once said, the UFO is not for your amusement, but it is for your transformation. Well, my answer is, it may not be for our amusement, but I believe we might be its amusement. Transformation might occur. I could say that in my time in it, I think I've grown somewhat because of it. To what degree? I'm not sure. I've learned a lot about me and about people, but I weigh the worth, and I feel like I'm drastically shortchanged. And maybe that's my own perception. Jeremy is spiritually more attuned than I am. I'm sure that's where I need the work. My personality is simply not conducive to the UFO field. I quit this once before due to many reasons, from aggravation to threats to real-life repercussions. I came back. I can assure you all that will not happen again. And I have again learned my lesson. You cannot thrive in this community doing solid work, as this is not what is desired. I can no longer withstand the sound of the wind after 2 decades on this wasteland. I'm going home. I'm also going to investigate the ghost phenomena, which has taken a decided front seat in my mind as a more hands-on direction of study, but I will not be a prominent figure in it. I think David Rountree, just what he just said about, I essentially asked him, how do you survive in this? How do you deal with it? And his answer was, put your head down and do the work. And that's what I intend to do. And if I have anything to say about it, if I encounter something new or a new wrinkle of some sort, I'll say it. I'll say it publicly, and then I'm out again. It's not going to be a hang around for me. So in closing this all out for me, I just want to say to our audience, thank you for supporting me and Jeremy in this. I wish every single one of you, peace and a good life. And I thank you for your counsel, your friendship, your support all this time. But there are people I want to mention by name. Colin Andrews, who I believe is a man of huge integrity and truth, and a guy, I might add, who's willing to look past the paranormal, quote unquote, and think about his own field of study in different ways. And these ideas and these ways may not be the popular belief system du jour, but he has the courage to stand up in front of a crowd in Washington, D.C. and say it point blank and damn the torpedoes. And that's to be commended as far as I'm concerned. Bruce Maccabee, who inspired me to do image analysis and was always there for talk or advice in the field. He's another guy to me that has immeasurable integrity and amazing intelligence. And so I genuinely thank him. And here's one that's going to amaze everybody. Dave Vaeni. Despite that we had this very public and vicious falling out, David and I had some very deep discussions that were ultimately beneficial to me on many levels. We were far from agreeing on everything, but that said, our own personalities probably were the origin for our falling out. But I also count our friendship in many ways another casualty of this field's relentless coliseum of discord. We both at one point during the worst of the fighting, and I'm sure everybody probably remembers that, we stopped and we said, there's something else going on here, and something else is involved that's making this far worse than it ought to be. And here's a clue. It wasn't Jeremy. It goes back to that same thing that we've talked about ad nauseum, that this field seems to thrive on chaos, discord. It's not good for relationships. That's for damn sure. And so I think in thinking about this the past week or so, that I feel so far removed from that whole disagreement with Dave Vaeni that, I think back on it and I'm like, it really was a lot more vicious than it should have been for a disagreement or a misunderstanding or whatever it was. I don't think either side helped matters very much, and I'll definitely admit to that. But I think something else was at work there. I mean, everybody can disagree with me if they want, but I genuinely believe that. And Jeremy Vaeni, my longstanding friend and co-host, who I will continue to work with privately, I'll tell you, if any of you get to be friends with Jeremy, you'll find out quickly that he is a rare bird. Tweet, Jeremy. He will never lie to you to make you feel better. He'll tell you like it is, and he'll add in tangents and possibilities that you never even thought of. He's an incredible thinker, and being that we're both kind of deviating out of this field, I feel that legitimate thought in this field being put forth is now at a loss without him. So it also bears mentioning that I have to thank Mark Allen and everybody over at Above Top Secret for also their support in things. I mean, Mark and the main owner, Skeptic Overlord, he'll appreciate that. They both really supported me doing visual work for them and put me on to a lot of interesting things. And so I appreciate all the support that they gave me too. But, my last story to you guys is going to be pretty much what I told a guy who wrote me. I think he was 20 years old, said he'd followed me from ATS to Paratopia, and he listened to the Paracast episodes and all of that. And, he wanted to know what to do to get involved with this. He wanted to know, where do you start? What do you do? He's tired of reading books. He's tired of watching videos. He wants to get involved. And I gave him some look in your local paper, talk to your local police officers about sightings and stuff like that, and even as going so far as to put an ad in the paper or to join MUFON or whatever. So there's a lot of ways that you can get involved, but my own personal view would be for you to run away from it. Run from the desire to become involved in this. If you are a person, I mean, he basically described himself as someone who was skeptical, critical, really was a fan of this show and of the Paracast, which I think are the two shows that have, and maybe I'm being lofty with this, but I think that between both shows, I think we've put the screws to not only practices but people in this who are not on the up and up. And he seems to be a fan of that. And I thought, here's a perfect chance to make someone avoid what can be a really rough road that doesn't offer a whole lot back to you. And so I told him, run, because this is what you'll encounter. And if you're not going to run, here's what you need to be aware of, that ultimately you may gain something out of this, but you will lose a lot in return. I mean, this is I feel like almost in certain ways it's counter to what Jeremy talks about in regard to the phenomena, what it might mean, what it might be trying to do. But this is the way I feel about it. I don't think it's evil. I don't say it's evil. I just say it is what it is. I still say when people ask me, is it real? I still say, that depends on what you mean by real. Out of all the people that we've talked to, I think George Hansen has the best handle on it out of many. And it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to solve or resolve into what he's come to with it. So I think ultimately I'm taking his advice, which was, well, George, where do we go from here? And Jeremy, his answer was, give up, because you can't. And so I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't fascinate me, but as far as being a public speaker on this or something like that, I'm just not finding it to be rewarding anymore. And I've run out of directions for myself. So your last 5 episodes are going to be with Jer, and then we're going to take it into the user-generated content. I will still be involved. I mean, we're still going to do our specials every now and then, but it's going to be in and out. It's not going to be any kind of consistency at all, for me at least. So that's it. That's my goodbye to the ufological community, I guess, because there's really nothing more for me to say. So that's it. I'm done.
Bye.
Right.
Well, then, like you said, I'm sticking around. I've got a few more. I feel like it's the end of Lost, where I need to A, tie up some loose ends, and B,
sure,
throw out some new threads. And I have a bunch of. Well, it's interesting. We've got 5 episodes left. I think some of them are going to be dream episodes for certain listeners, and the last one is a dream episode for me. And I won't be telling you who any of these people are, because I don't want Psycho Show to try to call them up or something, be like, "Don't do this show," or something. But I just I don't want to leave on an angry note or a whatever note. I want to leave on this note, Jeff, which is to say that it has been my privilege, as the cliche goes, my honor and privilege, and it's true, to have done this show with you. And
ditto.
I think if there is such a thing as important podcasting, I think we at least got to touch a few different levels of that.
Oh, yeah.
From the just hard-nosed reporter, rational Emma Woods stuff to the we're touching high strangeness Colin Andrews stuff.
Yeah.
To forcing certain people in ufology to think in different ways and to tackle different subjects than they normally do on shows.
Yeah.
And to bring new people in really deep ways, and, scientists and stuff. So I think we done good here in 65 episodes.
Oh, I do too. Yeah.
And I just think that you are, and here's where I try not to cry.
Don't cry, Jeremy. Don't do it. This is going to ruin the show. We got to laugh.
I really think that you're an amazing person.
Well, thank you.
Personally and in this field. I think anyone that has the sorts of experiences that you have, and you know what they all are, and they're all, you know, in the forefront of your brain.
Sure.
And you have not taken full financial advantage of that, and you have not started a cult of celebrity around yourself or a real cult around yourself.
Right.
I think that takes a lot of, I don't know what the word would be. I don't know if it's bravery or...
Sanity?
Sanity, yeah. Well, a lot of working against your own best financial interest. I mean, you're somebody who could be that guy, and you're not. And I think that speaks highly of you and makes you completely credible to a lot of people. It doesn't make you credible to me because you just are credible to me because I know you.
Yeah. Well, you've been to the house.
That's right. I've haunted the fart chair.
Yes.
So, and I want to say that even though you claim to be in this for selfish reasons, and that's partly true,
it is.
And healthily so, you've nevertheless done a lot of great for a lot of people, and we've seen that reflected in emails.
Oh, I hope, yeah.
And for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that what I read and said and talked in between, I hope that didn't. I don't mean to put anybody off and say that nothing I've done has been worth it and it's all been one huge failure, because I don't think that at all. As I said, I've gained some things about this, and I've said before that, and I told this young man who wrote me the same thing. I said, you will learn next to nothing about the phenomena itself, which should be your main focus, not the personalities. I said, but you will learn volumes about you. You will learn volumes about what you fear. You will learn why you fear. I never, growing up, I never thought I had control issues and all of that. I never thought that's what that was. But now I realize that how is it a guy that plays in metal bands all through the 80s doesn't do a single drug and doesn't get falling down drunk and doesn't do all those things that you're supposed to do when you're that guy? And that's because you fear losing control. And I think that's a big lesson for me. But I think, when I look at the whole thing, I do think that I've learned, I've learned that this field, when I say the UFO field, I mean just this field, because I don't know really anything about the ghost community and how they work and what it's like. But from what David and Stephen just told us, it's not dissimilar. They have their Billy Myers too, but it's sure as hell from the outlook seems a lot more friendly to me. And I think it probably would be easier to ignore the nonsense and not have to fight it and not have to worry about it attacking you.
Well, I think everyone gets that.
Yeah,
I
certainly
think anyone thinks you're like, bah, humbug, I'm leaving this field.
No, I don't. I know some people might take it that way. People do hear sometimes what they want to, but I do believe,
bah, humbug, I'm leaving this field. But you're not saying, bah, humbug, I
got nothing out of this.
Anything, I didn't help anybody.
No, but I got very little out of, what's it about?
But you sure did control my my emotionally telling you how much I'm going to miss you by interjecting and trying to make it all about how something else. So
right.
I'd like to thank you for that. One last control before you
Yes,
leave.
there it is.
No, fuck you, dude. I'm going back to this because I want to tell you that I love you.
Well, I love you too.
And like I said, it's been an absolute privilege to do the show with you and to be your friend. And for that, I have David Vaeni to thank, actually.
Well, and that's certainly not gonna. And again, this is not. And I've said to Jeremy in emails and on the phone, I said, if ending this show, I hope this doesn't mean that we're not going to be on the phone every day and that we're not going to be doing projects together of one sort or another. We're still going to do all those things. So this is not like an end of our friendship or anything like that, which ultimately concerns you. But, this is all about really just, sadly enough, with when I think back over the money that I've dumped into this subject, the time, and not just time, not just like weekend days, but like literally taking off of work for 3 days and going to Gulf Breeze, or the strain that it's put on my marriage and the strain that it's put on me as a dad, that all makes me feel, I don't know, I get sick at my stomach when I think about it, because I always talk about taking a step back, but I don't take my own advice a lot of times because of that. I don't actually do that. And when I do, when I take the huge step back and look at what I've been doing, it is a loss of control. It's a loss of, how much do you study something before it becomes distasteful to your life? And then how much do you come home and vent to your wife about who said what about whom that day? I mean, is that always going to be the topic of conversation? And my lovely wife said to me on the phone yesterday, because I was so pissed off at everything, and I said, I don't even know that I'm, going to finish out 70 episodes. And she said, I wish you would stop. And this is a woman who has relentlessly supported me for 23 years this year in this, and has never whined once about it. And I'll make this revelation before I go, in that this field and circumstances in it separated us for 6 months, 10 or more years ago. And so the thought of almost losing my wife to this because of my involvement in it and where it led me was not good. And of course, I would never let something like that happen again. But that's how bad it can get. And so you have to weigh what toll it takes on you versus what are you getting out of it. And for me, the past month or so, it's been light, very light. And in just realizing that, that's why I made the statement to Jeremy, I don't think I've got any more to say. And Lisa made the comment to me, Jeff, there's nothing wrong with leading a normal life. There's something to be said for that. And she's right. And so I'm going to go play some rock and roll Friday night. And, and I'm going to be that guy who puts this on a back burner and does it when he has time and thinks about it when he has time. But other than that, I'm going to go play music. I'm going to go do art, and I'm going to do what I want to do. So I'm stepping out of feeling obligated, and that's been a hard thing for me to do. It's not easy to walk away from, all this time and all this money and all this effort and all this time away from family and all of that. It's not easy to put that down and go, okay, I need to step away from the table. That's really not easy to do, but that's what I feel I have to do. And so I think everybody can understand that on some level, at least part of it. But let me end it with this, look at, and everybody should think about this. When you're in this, when you're involved in it deeply, think about time and think about how much you got. And think about the people in your life. Because ultimately, that's what really matters. All of this shit, really, in the long stretch of things, it's important. But does it matter to you to live? Does it matter? Because we can think about our friend Mac, who isn't here anymore. And you can realize that being young and being healthy and vibrant and a great mind doesn't mean anything. When it's time to pull the plug, it's done. And you're done. And so that's the thing you ultimately have to think about is when you look back over your life, when you're breathing that last breath, what did you do with it? And how was it spent? And so that's the kind of things I'm thinking. I'm 43 years old. I just turned 43 on the 14th of April, and I told Jeremy I intend to go to 115, but that's not the point. The point is you need to take stock of your life. And I want everybody who listens to this show to do that, because that's the biggest thing I've learned is, what's it worth to you? Is it worth all of that and possibly losing things that you care about? Is it worth it? And to me, it's not anymore. At one point it was, when it was standing in the floor staring me down, it was worth it. That's not happening. It hasn't happened lately. I expect it will again. I expect that the guy in the black sheet will talk to me at some point again, I'm sure, but I'm not looking for it. I'm just not going to devote myself anymore like that again. So everybody, thank you very much for everything and for listening and for talking. And as I said, supporting this show. I think we did good, Jared. I think you got to know when it's going down, and I think you need to know when to quit. And for me, it's now. So I am glad of one thing, that I'm leaving on my own terms. That this isn't the kind of thing where I feel forced out or anything. It's completely my decision to do this. My wife's not saying quit or I'll leave you. I'm leaving because I choose to. And that's how I leave it. So thank you, everybody. And I'll see you around.
Go find your bliss. I will see you in 5 episodes.
Ba-ding.
Thank you and good night.
Yes.